Chapter 2559. Chapter 2559. Chapter 2559 Origin Tea. After all, Lualua was the strongest amongst the four of them. In addition, she had not been discovered yet, so she was naturally safer than staying by Yi Xian's side. However, how could they find a reasonable excuse to get Mi Yan and Fian to leave Yi Xian's side with their maids? This was a problem. Yi Xian was very clear that no matter where he went, there would definitely be people sent by the city lord behind him. Naturally, Yi Xian would not be able to hide the fact that he left with the two maids. Furthermore, if the two maids suddenly left, they would definitely be tracked down. Yi Xian kept thinking about it, looking for a suitable solution. Unexpectedly, someone actually gave Yi Xian a reasonable way to get away. It turned out that after the Azure Dragon Gang leader returned, he could not take this lying down. During this period of time, he had not been idle and had been investigating Yi Xian. In the beginning, the Azure Dragon Gang leader suspected that Yi Xian was one of the city lord's men. Naturally, he did not dare to act rashly. However, in his subsequent investigations, he discovered that Yi Xian wasn't a member of the city lord's mansion at all. The only thing that happened was that the city lord had sent him a mansion. Although the location of the mansion was not bad, a mansion was not enough to prove that the city lord favored Yi Xian. In the eyes of the Azure Dragon Gang leader, perhaps Yi Xian was considered to be talented, which was why the city lord valued him and prepared to nurture him. However, the nurturing process had not started yet. In this case, perhaps killing Yi Xian now would not cause too much trouble for him. Furthermore, the Azure Dragon Gang leader suspected that the city lord was the one who had deliberately weakened the Azure Dragon Gang. As a result, the city lord could not take this lying down. Therefore, he sent people to prepare to rob and kill Yi Xian. Of course, he did not send his core men. In fact, they were not even considered members of the Azure Dragon Gang. They were just people from a small gang. Moreover, the plan was very simple. They just needed to find a reason to teach Yi Xian a lesson, and then create the illusion that Yi Xian was accidentally killed. This kind of thing could be considered very common. The outside of the city was different from the inside. In the Origin Mystic realm, strength was the rule. The city lord's words were only useful inside the city. Once outside the city gates, the people outside would not even care about the city lord. Of course, these people would not go against the city lord's powerful strength. At this moment, Yi Xian led the two girls into a tea house outside the city as if they were strolling. This tea house was quite unique. There was a small pavilion and a few large tables that were casually placed there. Of course, this tea house was not simple. Because the tea was the famous 9 tunes of ghost tea. Not only did it require the addition of an origin beast's corpse as nourishment every 100 years, but it also required the use of origin divine crystals to set up a special restriction in order to produce the tea. Therefore, the tea contained a lot of origin source law energy. It could be said that ordinary people could not afford to drink the tea here. This was because the tea here cost 1 origin divine crystal per pot. This price was enough to make many people feel intimidated. There were not many customers here. Moreover, every customer had to serve a pot of tea. Perhaps they would sit here for an entire month. They slowly tasted the tea and at the same time, slowly tasted the origin source law energy contained in the tea leaves. Origin divine crystals could be directly absorbed by people, but only by borrowing the fixed origin source law energy. Origin source tea, on the other hand, allowed people to explore the mysteries of the origin source law through drinking tea. Yi Xian came here with a purpose. Mi Mu and Fian were both from the Divine Realm continent, so they naturally could not come into contact with the origin source law. On the other hand, the origin source law was the most important element for breaking through to the Supreme Divine Lord realm. Therefore, Yi Xian brought the two of them here to taste the tea so that they could come into contact with the origin source law. As for whether they would gain anything from it, he did not know. Yi Xian walked into the small pavilion, threw down an origin divine crystal, and asked for a pot of origin source tea. This pot of tea was not to be underestimated. In fact, the space inside was very large. It could be said that this small pot of tea was enough to fill a large vat of tea. Yi Xian poured a cup for the two of them, then said, "Try it. This origin source tea contains the aura of the origin source law. I don't know if you will gain anything from it, but it will allow you to come into contact with the origin source law." "Oh, there's such a miraculous tea? I would like to give it a try." Mi Mu was naturally not going to be polite with Yi Xian, so after hearing Yi Xian's words, she picked up the teacup in front of her and gently sniffed it. The tea's fragrance assailed her nostrils, but there was nothing special about it. Mi then gently took a sip, but her brows furrowed slightly. Sister Mi, what's wrong? Is there something different about this tea? Seeing Mi expression, Fian asked curiously. In the previous month's conversation, they were very clear about what kind of place this was. It was an existence that surpassed the continent of the God realm. It was a special origin source secret realm where the lowest was the God Emperor realm. When they first heard this news, it could be said that they were shocked. After all, in the continent of the God realm, the God Emperor realm was already the master of the God realm, with hundreds of millions of people under their command. But here they could be seen everywhere. How could they not be shocked? Fortunately, the two of them had good self-control, and quickly recovered from their shock. It was also because of this that the two of them were very curious about anything that could be used after the origin source secret realm. When Mi heard Fian's question, she still frowned and said, I can't describe this feeling either. After drinking this tea, I seem to have sensed something, but I can't grasp it. This is a very mysterious feeling, and it's not something that can be described with words. Why don't you give it a try, Sister Fian? The two of them had gone through life and death, and it could be said that they had long been like sisters. When Fian heard Mi's words, she naturally became interested and took a sip. A moment later, Fian's expression changed, but she immediately drank the tea in the teacup in her hand in one gulp. How is it? Do you have any enlightenment? Xian and Mi looked at Fian at the same time, because Fian's current behavior was clearly different from usual. From her expression and her actions, it could be seen that Fian had some enlightenment. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her to be like this. I seem to have sensed the aura of some kind of law, but I can't tell what kind of law it is. And Xian was slightly stunned. One had to know that the origin source tea was naturally the aura of the origin source law, but why would Fian say that? Chapter 2560. Chapter 2560. Chapter 2560. Tracing to the origin. The so-called origin referred to tracing back to the source. In other words, the so-called origin law was actually more appropriate to call it the origin law. What he deserved was not the power of one law, but the foundation of all laws. In reality, it was impossible for everyone to cultivate the same law power. There were so many laws, so who could truly master all of them? This was obviously impossible. Therefore, after coming into contact with the origin law, perhaps everyone's reaction would be different. This was the true origin law power. At this moment, Mi couldn't describe what she was feeling. Fian, on the other hand, seemed to have understood something. It wasn't that the difference in talent between them was too great. Since Mi was able to become a divine master, it was enough to prove her talent. Although Fian's talent was also not bad, it was still slightly inferior to Mi. Therefore, Fian's feeling was clearer than Mi. However, because the two of them grasped different laws, the things they could sense when coming into contact with the origin law were also different. Xian didn't interrupt their conversation. Instead, he picked up his teacup and poured the tea directly into his mouth. Suddenly, Xian felt like the tea in his mouth was swallowing his mouth, but at the same time, something was spat out from somewhere. Xian's eyes were filled with confusion, but his expression was solemn. He was already thinking quickly. Xian was immersed in the aura of the origin law. At the same time, he was quickly comprehending and understanding the changes just now. What was the origin law of devour? Xian couldn't help but think. Devour? On the surface, it seemed like some kind of power had swallowed something in front of him and made it disappear. However, Xian seemed to remember that there was a type of law called the law of conservation. The meaning of this law was that all power was balanced, and if a portion of it disappeared, it meant that there would be an additional portion somewhere else. At the same time, Xian thought of his devouring ability. It could be said that it was because of the system and this devouring ability that Xian was able to rapidly increase his strength. In that case, this devouring ability was actually a form of conservation. Devour resources and turn them into Xian's leveling up experience. In other words, Xian devoured the energy of those things and strengthened it into its own power. Thus, the energy did not disappear. It merely moved from one place to another. However, what did the law of devouring mean? Devouring meant swallowing the things in front of it, but where did those things go? Did he really disappear completely? Impossible, the law of conservation would not allow such a thing to happen. In other words, the law of devouring was actually also a method of transforming energy. Merely, It was transforming the target in front of it into another form of energy through devouring. Suddenly, Yi Xian thought of the law of gravity. On the surface, the law of gravity seemed to increase the gravitational force in a certain area to achieve one's desired goal. But where did this gravity come from? Perhaps it could be said that this gravitational force did not appear out of nowhere. Instead, it was a power borrowed from somewhere else. Yi Xian was comprehending in his heart, but unknowingly, there was an incomparably mysterious power circling around him. This power could not be seen or touched. It could not even be detected by divine consciousness. However, it could be sensed. At the same time, the system's notification sounded. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to the host. The host has grasped the essence of the origin source law. You have been blessed by the origin source law. You have been blessed by the myriad law. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to the host. You have been recognized by the myriad law. The unused power in your body has been completely unleashed. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to the host for a super breakthrough. The host is now a superior first-grade Emperor God. This was impossible. Yi Xian's eyes widened. First-grade Emperor God? Yi Xian heard the notification clearly. He was not an inferior first-grade Emperor God. Nor was he a medial first-grade Emperor God. He was truly a superior first-grade Emperor God. This kind of level up and breakthrough defied common sense. Therefore, even Yi Xian, the owner of the system, could not help but wonder if the system had made a mistake. Or perhaps he had heard wrongly. System, did I hear wrongly? What realm did you just say? Ding! System notification. The host is now a superior first-grade Emperor God. Did he hear wrongly? Yi Xian was slightly stunned. However, he said, System, are you sure you did not make a mistake? Ding! System notification. Host, please take note. The system will not make a mistake. Ding! System notification. Host, please take note. When a person cultivates, it is impossible for them to achieve the so-called 100% cultivation effect. It could be said that before one truly obtained the origin source law, there was a large amount of unused power in everyone's body. This power wandered around the body, including the physical body, divine consciousness, and even the soul. Under normal circumstances, this mysterious power could not be detected by anyone. There was no way one could use it unless they were recognized by the myriad law. This power could only be truly guided into the master's body after the myriad law had recognized it. Of course, this process was extremely wasteful. Being able to obtain even 1/10 of it was already extremely rare. The system said so much in one breath, which was rare. Yi Xian finally understood why he had broken through this time. To use the most vivid analogy, Yi Xian was like a cup of water, but this cup of water was divided into two pieces. Normally, the only thing Yi Xian could drink was the half cup of water that wasn't hidden. Even from the looks of it, the cup didn't seem to be the slightest bit abnormal. However, when the partition was broken, all the water in the cup would flow into the cup, allowing Yi Xian to drink more water in one gulp. However, this was only a one-time break. Once the membrane was broken, the water would flow out. Unfortunately, there was only a small amount of water. At this moment, Yi Xian had broken through. This was the principle behind it. Yi Xian had just swallowed all the accumulated power in his body in one gulp. This was a one-time reward. Perhaps Yi Xian would never encounter such a good thing again in his life. After all, once all the accumulated power was swallowed up, Yi Xian would have to experience many years and many realms before he could achieve such a breakthrough again. Chapter 2561. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios Trouble. After figuring this out, Yi Xian was still extremely happy. After all, he had achieved such a huge breakthrough in one go. If Yi Xian was still not satisfied, then he would really be a little unsatisfied. At this moment, Yi Xian had a faint smile on his face as he watched the two women taste the tea. To Yi Xian, this origin source tea might not have any value at all. Comprehending the power of origin source law was not just a matter of words. Comprehending the power of origin source law required one to experience it personally. Furthermore, everyone's experience would be different. Yi Xian's way of feeling and experience was only suitable for Yi Xian himself. Even if Yi Xian explained it in detail to others, it would not have any effect at all. The two women seemed to be very obsessed with the origin source tea. They drank cup after cup as they searched for an opportunity to comprehend it. However, at this moment, an uninvited guest arrived. "Hey, these two girls are really pretty. Why don't we snatch them?" A voice sounded. Yi Xian's divine consciousness immediately swept over and saw that there were 4 people looking in their direction from outside the tea pavilion. Among the 4 people, only one was looking at the 2 women. The other 3 were looking at Yi Xian. Furthermore, they clearly had a trace of hostility. However, Yi Xian didn't have the slightest impression of these people. Who were they? Why were they hostile towards him? System, detect the strength of these people. Ding. System notification. Target specified. 3 low-level celestial emperors, 1 mid-level celestial emperor. Perhaps if it had been before Yi Xian drank that cup of tea, these people would have been impossible for Yi Xian to defeat. However, this cup of tea was enough to determine Yi Xian's fate. What was a great opportunity? Wasn't the so-called great opportunity referring to this kind of thing that was clearly impossible to happen? But it had happened. Countless people had tasted this origin source tea. There were also quite a few people who did gain some benefits. However, how many people could directly receive the blessings of the laws of origin and the laws of myriad elements like Yi Xian? Since ancient times, there were probably only a handful of them. This was a great opportunity. The great opportunity that belonged to Yi Xian did not rely on the system, nor did it rely on any external forces. It was Yi Xian's own opportunity. In the first place, the origin tea didn't matter how much it was. If one could comprehend it, a cup or even a sip would allow one to comprehend it. As for those with insufficient aptitude and luck, even if they drank the origin tea every day, they might not be able to gain any enlightenment. This was everyone's destiny. This was everyone's opportunity. At this moment, Yi Xian's divine sense had locked onto the 4 of them, but he was not afraid at all. If this had happened not long ago, even if it was only the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, Yi Xian would have had no choice but to flee upon seeing these 4 people. Unfortunately, sometimes, opportunities were just like that. A stick of incense was enough to change a person's fate. These people were actually the people that the Azure Dragon Gang leader had arranged to come here with the intention of killing Yi Xian. The information they had obtained was very detailed. Not only did it mention Yi Xian's cultivation base, but it also included everything that had happened to Yi Xian after he had come to the origin source secret realm. Therefore, they only felt contempt for Yi Xian. However, when they arrived at Yi Xian's side, they realized that they couldn't see through Yi Xian's cultivation base, which was why they were puzzled. Generally speaking, people with higher cultivation bases would be able to see through the cultivation bases of people with lower cultivation bases. However, there were exceptions, such as people who cultivated special concealment abilities. At this moment, one of them raised his doubts. Didn't this guy say that he was at most a 1st or 2nd rank emperor god? Why can't I see through his cultivation base? Why do I feel like I'm facing an expert? According to the information on the information, this guy already possesses many special abilities. Perhaps he also cultivated some sort of concealment ability. Come, let's go over. The leader didn't have the slightest bit of doubt. The source of the information was very reliable. It could be said that he had no right to doubt it. When Yi Xian saw those people walking towards him, he knew that his chance had come. This was the best time to let the 2 women leave on their own. Therefore, Yi Xian didn't care about letting the 2 women enjoy the tea. Instead, he used a secret voice transmission technique to say to them, "When the fight starts, leave this place immediately and look for Luo Luo. Luo Luo will take good care of you." What about you, Yi Xian? If you stay here, what will happen if you encounter a strong enemy? Mi Yan was the first to react. She was already looking at the 4 people. Don't worry about me. Don't worry, these few people can't do anything to me. Besides, I've already told you that the City Lord values my talent. There are people from the City Lord's mansion by my side. Even if I can't beat them, the people from the City Lord's mansion will immediately come to my rescue, said Yi Xian. In order to let the 2 women leave without worry, Yi Xian even mentioned the City Lord's mansion. The 2 women looked at each other and nodded silently. When Yi Xian saw the 2 women nod, he stood up without hesitation and walked towards the 4 people. However, he didn't show any abnormality. He looked as if he was just going to leave. Among the 4 people, one of them took a second look at the 2 women. Clearly, he didn't want the 2 women to leave. After all, both Mi Yen and Fian were absolute beauties. However, he knew what the mission this time was, so he immediately retracted his thoughts and focused all his attention on Yi Xian. Yi Xian ignored the four people and walked straight out. Yi Xian didn't want to fight in the pavilion. After all, the owner of the pavilion who could sell the origin tea here was definitely not to be trifled with. Moreover, if Yi Xian fought here, it wouldn't be good if the two women were injured. The two women's current strength was extremely low. Because of the teleportation, they were still in a weakened state. It was impossible for them to recover without some time. Therefore, Yi Xian knew that if he fought, the two women would be injured. Therefore, his plan was to leave this place first and then fight with these people later. When the four people saw Yi Xian walking out, they followed him without hesitation. In fact, since Yi Xian knew about this, they knew even better. The person who opened this tea house was not one to be trifled with. It should be known that there was only one tea house in the entire first level. Of course, there might be other tea houses in other places, but this was the only place that sold origin tea. If there was a faction that could grow the origin tea, it would definitely be a huge force. If there was only one person, it would probably be a super strong person. If they fought in the pavilion and angered that super strong person, they would probably have a hard time. Therefore, the four people didn't hesitate at all. They followed Yi Xian and walked out. Soon, they arrived outside the tea house. Chapter 2562. Chapter 2562. Chapter 2562. Who is it? One of them shouted at Yi Xian. Although Yi Xian had suspected that they were targeting him, it was only now that Yi Xian was certain that they were targeting him. Yi Xian's figure moved, but he quickly ran forward. It was as if he knew that he wasn't strong enough and that was why he avoided them. However, in reality, Yi Xian deliberately slowed down. Otherwise, with Yi Xian's unlimited teleportation ability, how could these people catch up to Yi Xian? At this moment, the four people didn't know that Yi Xian's seemingly difficult escape was just a facade that Yi Xian deliberately created. It was just to attract the attention of the people watching him. As long as those people put their attention on him and ignored Mi Li and Fian, Yi Xian's goal would be achieved. Of course, in order to achieve this effect, Yi Xian had no choice but to lead the four people forward. As for Mi Li and Fian, Yi Xian couldn't do anything. This was all he could do. Fortunately, before they left, Yi Xian had notified Luo Luo and asked her to come and pick up Mi Li and Fian. With Luo Luo's strength, as long as she found Mi Li and Fian, the three women would be much safer together. This chase lasted for a full 4 hours. Although Yi Xian wasn't moving forward at full speed, 4 hours was enough for Yi Xian to lead the four people far away. And this distance was enough. Suddenly, Yi Xian stopped. The four of them were slightly stunned. It could be said that it was extremely difficult for them to chase after Yi Xian. Yi Xian's speed always made them feel that they would be able to catch up if they were a little faster. However, they were usually only a little bit away from him. At this moment, Yi Xian's sudden stop made them feel a little uncomfortable. Humph, kid, why aren't you running anymore? Keep running. I'd like to see how far you can run. One of the four people stepped forward and looked at Yi Xian with disdain. Until now, they still didn't realize that Yi Xian was doing this on purpose. Yi Xian turned around and looked at the four people. He said indifferently, "Why should I run? Haha, how interesting. Kid, you ran so fast just now. What? You're not willing to admit it now. But it's good that you didn't run. It saves us from wasting our time. All right, kid, just surrender. You've offended someone you shouldn't. Today, we'll kill you, so don't hold a grudge against us. We're just working for others." Yi Xian obviously knew that they were working for others, but he didn't know who they were working for. Yi Xian had seen how the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang observed Yi Xian, but Yi Xian didn't know that the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang wanted to kill Yi Xian. The reason was very simple. Yi Xian didn't know Lin Tianju's identity at all. Of course, at this moment, Yi Xian also hoped to obtain what he wanted from these people. That was, who exactly wanted to kill him. Ever since he came to the Origin Secret Realm, although Yi Xian had offended a few people, he could only be considered a small fry. To be able to invite 4 people to chase after him, he must have some background. Could it be that the few of you really want to kill me? Yi Xian looked at the 4 people and said indifferently. He was already thinking about how to get them to tell him what he wanted. Haha, kid. Do you think we've been chasing you for so long because we have nothing better to do? All right, you're about to die. What other wishes do you have? Tell us all at once. I don't have any wishes. However, I don't understand who wants to make trouble for me. After all, I'm weak. I really don't know who wants to kill me. Yi Xian followed this person's words and asked his question. They looked at Yi Xian with pity. Poor guy, you don't even know who wants to kill you. All right, you're going to die anyway, so there's no harm in telling you. You've offended He Lin. He Lin has always been a vengeful person. Although I don't know how you've offended him, I can only say that you're unlucky. He Lin? Who was that? This was the first time Yi Xian had heard this name. He was sure that he didn't know who this He Lin was. Why did this guy want to kill him? May I ask, who is this He Lin? I don't have any impression of him. Unfortunately, this time, these people no longer said anything. Instead, they directly took out their own Dharma treasures. All right, little brat, cut the crap and accept your death. Yi Xian saw that these people were determined to kill him. Moreover, they weren't willing to talk to him anymore. Naturally, he didn't want to waste any more time. He waved his hand and Wei Zhentian controlled the god-slaying sword to charge forward. Puchi! A lower emperor god was killed without any suspense. He didn't even have time to react before he was killed by Yi Xian on the spot. The remaining 3 people widened their eyes in shock. Didn't they say that this guy was just a hierarch not long ago? Then, even if he had a breakthrough, he would only be a rank 1 or rank 2 lower emperor god. Why? Why was this guy able to kill their comrades so easily? Oh no, this guy hid his cultivation. Quick, everyone, let's attack together and use our strongest divine ability. Another person shouted. At the same time, he was ready to activate his divine ability. Unfortunately, he didn't have the chance to activate his divine ability, because the god-slaying sword was already aimed at him. With the increase in Yi Xian's strength, the power of the god-slaying sword had also increased significantly. At that moment, another sword strike pierced through that second person. That second person was actually killed before he could even unleash his domain's power. Killing 2 people in a row in such a casual manner. This time, the remaining 2 people couldn't remain calm. If they said that Yi Xian killed all of them because they were careless and allowed Yi Xian to successfully launch a sneak attack with his divine weapon, then how would they explain the second person? He was killed before he could even activate his divine ability. With such powerful strength and violent attack power, they would be idiots if they still believed that Yi Xian was just an ordinary person. Kid, who are you? Why do you have such powerful strength? Chapter 2563. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios A. Bell. Initially, they thought that this would be an easy mission. Who would have thought that this guy had concealed his cultivation base and pretended to be a pig to eat a tiger? Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not care about them at all. Since he could not get the information he wanted from them, there was no point in keeping them alive. After all, if Yi Xian did not kill them, they would kill him. No matter who it was that wanted Yi Xian's life, Yi Xian would make them pay the price. Killing them was undoubtedly the best price to pay. The god-slaying sword drew a bright ray of light across the sky. In an instant, it slashed towards the intermediate emperor god. At this moment, how could that person still think that Yi Xian was a mere ultimate god? Even if he did not have good eyesight, he knew that Yi Xian in front of him was not an ordinary person. Therefore, when he saw that Yi Xian's target was him, he did not hesitate and immediately took out a treasure. It was a bell that was densely covered with countless Sanskrit words. Zhong Shangyun circled the light of the law one after another, constantly moving around. As for this bell, it was also the greatest trump card of these fellows. This thing was something he had coincidentally obtained from a beast hunting area during one of his beast hunts. It could be said that this guy had never dared to show this bell to others. After all, even a fool would know that something obtained from the beast hunting area was not something simple. Although he did not fully understand the use of this bell, he had figured out the simplest way to use it. That was to cover himself and then activate the power of the law to make this bell the strongest protective force. As for how strong the defensive power of the bell was, even he himself did not know. This was because he had once fought with a superior emperor god expert. However, his strength was not enough to defeat the superior emperor god expert. Hence, he took out the bell. Just like what he was doing now, he directly covered himself. After that, The high-grade Emperor God attacked crazily for a whole month, but he couldn't do anything about it. In the end, he could only leave it as it was. This time, this fellow had placed his life on this bell. He believed that this bell would be able to protect him. As for the other enemy, when he saw how powerful Xianxia was, he was scared out of his wits. At this moment, when he saw his boss release his strongest defense and become the only target of attack, he started to flee without a care for anything else. Boom! The god-slaying sword slammed into the bell. Unfortunately, it had no effect at all. Instead, it was bounced off. Xianxia frowned slightly. This transcendent artifact had a very strong defensive power. With a wave of his hand, Xianxia pointed at the escaping person and said softly, 6 syllables mantra die. In an instant, a mysterious power was activated. This mysterious power immediately surrounded the person who was running away. Suddenly, that person stopped moving and fell from the sky. Silently, it was just a single word, but it had ended the life of a middle-class emperor god. After that, Xianxia focused all his attention on the last person. System, detect that transcendent artifact. Xianxia said to the system. This was because that bell always gave Xianxia a mysterious and ancient aura. Ding! System notification. Target set. Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell. The Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell was the most valuable treasure of an ancient expert. It was extremely powerful and had both offensive and defensive capabilities. It also had many special abilities. Legend had it that once this Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell was activated, it had the power to destroy the heavens and earth. However, it was obvious that this Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell wasn't activated at all. Instead, it was used as a shield by that fellow. Xianxia frowned slightly, but he started to think. Xianxia was already interested in this Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell. It could be said that in the Origin Secret Realm, other than Wei Zhentian and the God Slayer, Xianxia's equipment and transcendent artifacts were already outdated. Even the God Slayer didn't seem to be enough. Fortunately, the God Slayer could still continue to evolve. However, the other transcendent artifacts weren't enough. However, Xianxia had his eyes on this Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell. Not bad, not bad. This bell is really good. I want it. Xianxia said indifferently. His tone clearly showed that he didn't care about the place inside the Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell. When that person heard Xianxia's words, he burst out laughing. Kid, I admit that you hit it very well. No one realized that you have such great strength. Perhaps you are a superior grade Emperor God. But so what? You still don't have the strength to break through my Divine Royal Bell. He was clearly at an absolute disadvantage. He had been forced into a corner by Xianxia to the point where he couldn't even put up a fight. However, this guy was still confident in himself. That was because in his eyes, no one could break through his defense. Thus, he had no need to fear anything. Xianxia smiled slightly, but couldn't be bothered with this guy. In Xianxia's mind, this guy had already been pronounced dead. Therefore, why would he waste time on him? Since this guy thought that he would be safe and sound by hiding in the Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell, Xianxia would show him what he was capable of. Xianxia gently pulled out the Divine Bow of Law, then slowly pulled the bowstring of the Divine Bow of Law. Since this guy had given up on attacking and only cared about defending, there was no need for Xianxia to be anxious. In that case, what kind of attack was Xianxia going to use this time? It was very simple. Sound. Yes, Xianxia was going to use sound to kill the enemy in the Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell. Didn't this guy think that he would be safe and sound by hiding in the Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell? Xianxia would show him how pathetic this idea was. Suddenly, Xianxia made his move. Xianxia continuously pulled on his Rule Divine Bow and shot a dozen arrows in all directions. However, the strange thing was that the target of these arrows wasn't the enemy in the bell, but his surroundings. All of a sudden, rays of light appeared one after another. It turned out that Xianxia was setting up an array formation. A simple array formation made with divine talismans. In that case, what was the purpose of this array formation? That was to amplify the sound, as well as to completely absorb the sound. When everything was set up, a sphere of light had formed around the Heavens equal Divine Royal Bell. This was the effect that Xianxia wanted. Enjoy it. I hope you can hold on for a little longer. Xianxia said casually. Then, under the control of Wei Zhentian, the God Slayer quickly attacked. Boom, boom, boom. Chapter 2564. Ultimate divine weapon. That person was flabbergasted. He simply could not understand what Yi Xian was doing. However, he soon found out. The sounds of explosions continued to ring out. Furthermore, they continued to reverberate through the array formation. These sounds would not spread out. Instead, they would be reflected the moment they hit the outer array formation. More importantly, every time they were reflected, the sound would be amplified several times. At the beginning, that person was indeed able to resist the sound. Unfortunately, as time passed, he was no longer able to withstand it. The incomparably loud sound reverberated through the array formation again and again. Even though that person had sealed off his hearing, it was impossible for him not to be affected. That was because the bell itself had the ability to amplify the sound. Many people knew that sound could cause vibrations. This was a way of exchanging the energy of the laws. Therefore, at this moment, the heavens equal divine emperor bell was already trembling non-stop in its reverberation. At the same time, a new loud sound was produced. These sounds continued to reverberate through the bell. As for that person, he was directly bearing the brunt of the sound. Poochie! That person could no longer withstand it and spat out a mouthful of blood. After spitting out that mouthful of blood, that person could no longer protect his mind. Ah! That person roared loudly, hoping that his roar would be able to resist the surrounding sound. Unfortunately, it was of no use. Poochie! Another mouthful of blood was coughed out. However, this time around, that person was in an incomparably miserable state. It could be said that he was now simply like a person made of blood. Blood was unceasingly flowing out from all over his body. Moreover, cracks had actually appeared on his body. Poochie! With a soft sound, a dignified mid-level celestial emperor was directly torn apart by the power of the sound and exploded. Yi Xian casually waved his hand and an opening immediately appeared in the array formation. Then the power of the sound rushed out through the opening. In the blink of an eye, countless mountains in front of the gap were sent flying out one after another. An incomparably huge gully was formed. This was the power of sound. In fact, there were quite a few people who cultivated the law of sound. However, not everyone could be so powerful. Of course, it could be said that Yi Xian did not rely on his own strength this time. He simply borrowed the power of the formation and the heavens equal divine royal bell. With a wave of his hand, Yi Xian's universe rings fell into Yi Xian's hands. Of course, there was also the heavens equal divine emperor bell. Only now could Yi Xian examine the heavens equal divine emperor bell in peace. System. Give me a detailed look at the attributes of this bell. Ding! System notification. This detection will consume 500,000 faith points. Would you like to confirm? Confirm. 500,000 faith points to check out the specific attributes of the heavens equal divine emperor bell. Yi Xian felt that it was worth it. Ding! System notification. Scanning activated. Analysis successful. The heavens equal divine royal bell was one of the super magic treasures of the ancient almighty, great Lord Heavens equal. It was extremely powerful and had 12 unique transformations. Ding! System notification. Warning. Warning. Host, please take note. This magic treasure's weapon spirit has the ability to make decisions independently. Host must defeat this weapon spirit immediately. Otherwise, this magic treasure will escape immediately. What? In order to obtain this magic treasure, one had to defeat the weapon spirit. Yi Xian was extremely shocked. He had never encountered such a situation before. Yi Xian could not see through this situation. However, there was one thing that Yi Xian was clear about. Right now he needed to fight. Without any hesitation, Yi Xian had already made his move. This was because at this moment, the heavens equal divine royal bell was already glowing. It was obvious that it was about to leave. God-slaying sword, quick, attack. Stop him from leaving. Yi Xian roared. At the same time, he also pounced forward. He pulled on his law divine bow, and rays of law power arrived before the god-slaying sword. However, a strange scene unfolded. The rays of law power were actually swallowed up by the heavens equal divine royal bell. This heavens equal divine royal bell was actually an existence that could ignore law power. A deep sense of helplessness appeared in Yi Xian's heart. A magic treasure that could ignore law power. How powerful was this thing? Boom! Suddenly, a loud sound was heard. It was the god-slaying sword. The god-slaying sword had finally launched an attack. Furthermore, with one attack, it had actually blocked the escape route of the Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell. This Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell could ignore law power, but it was afraid of pure physical attacks. In an instant, Yi Xian figured out the reason behind this. In reality, this Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell might be very powerful. However, this Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell was not an absolutely perfect magic treasure. Although it could ignore law power attacks, it could not ignore physical attacks. Yi Xian was delighted. He could not care less and immediately flew towards the Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell. However, at this moment, a voice rang out. "Kid, you want to subdue me?" Yi Xian's figure suddenly stopped. When he heard this voice, Yi Xian already knew who had spoken. It was the artifact spirit of the Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell. Yi Xian paused for a moment, then said, "Could it be that I am not worthy to be your master?" Perhaps it would be easier to subdue the Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell if he spoke directly to the artifact spirit. Unexpectedly, Yi Xian's words made the Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell laugh. "Haha, kid, you think you have what it takes? What right do you have to possess me? Do you know who I am?" Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell. An ancient treasure. "Am I wrong?" Yi Xian said. "Haha, an ancient treasure? You underestimate me too much. I am indeed the Heavens Equal Divine Royal Bell, but this is just a name given to me by ignorant people in later generations. My real name is the Primal Chaos Seal." Primal Chaos Seal? What was that? Yi Xian was puzzled, but after a moment, his expression changed drastically. The Primal Chaos Seal, the Heaven's Wheel, the Soul Destroyer Source, the Singularity Ring, the 4 ultimate artifacts that split the heavens and earth. This was an ultimate artifact. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. What was an ultimate artifact? The so-called ultimate artifact referred to the source of all artifacts, the absolute power left behind at the beginning of the heavens and earth. Legend had it that the 4 ultimate artifacts were not created by anyone, because no one could create them. They were naturally formed in the heavens and earth, and each one represented absolute power. The Primal Chaos Seal was also known as the source of all nomological power, because all the nomological power was born from the Primal Chaos Seal. The Heaven's Wheel was said to be created by the Heaven's Wheel. The Soul Destroyer Source was the starting point and focus of all living things, the source that controlled the life and death of all living things. Chapter 2565. The test of the Primal Chaos Seal. The 4 ultimate divine artifacts were all legendary objects. Everyone knew about them, but no one had ever seen them before. Whether it was in the legends or in the records of ancient books, the 4 ultimate divine artifacts were undoubtedly the main characters of the story. And today, Yi Xian had actually encountered one of them. Yi Xian's first reaction was disbelief. If the ultimate divine artifacts could be seen so easily, they wouldn't be called ultimate divine artifacts. Legend had it that since ancient times, countless factions had worked tirelessly to find traces of the 4 ultimate divine artifacts. Unfortunately, their efforts were to no avail. At this moment, Yi Xian looked at the Heavens Equal Divine Emperor Bell in front of him and laughed. What a joke! A mere artifact spirit dares to call itself the Primal Chaos Seal. Do you know what kind of divine artifact the Primal Chaos Seal is? Of course, Yi Xian didn't believe that the Heavens Equal Divine Emperor Bell in front of him was the Primal Chaos Seal. After all, the Primal Chaos Seal was one of the 4 ultimate divine artifacts. How could it possibly be so simple? You don't believe me? Who would have thought that the artifact spirit would question him as soon as Yi Xian finished speaking? Of course not. If the 4 ultimate divine artifacts were like you, I would rather believe that there were no ultimate divine artifacts in this world. Haha, good boy. How dare you doubt me? Very well. Today, I'll show you what the Primal Chaos Seal is. Yi Xian hadn't reacted yet, but following the words of the artifact spirit, he saw the entire world begin to collapse. Everything that Yi Xian could see, everything that his divine sense could sense, began to return to nothingness. That feeling was as if these mountains, rivers, and even the sky were nothing more than a wisp of green smoke. But now, it was as if a gentle breeze had blown away all of this. Was this an illusion? Yi Xian was stunned, but he soon realized that this wasn't an illusion. It was reality. The Primal Chaos Seal. This was actually one of the 4 ultimate divine artifacts, the Primal Chaos Seal. Yi Xian's expression changed. Everything that was happening before his eyes left Yi Xian no choice but to believe it. The primal chaos seal was the source of all laws, but at the same time, it was also the laws that created everything in time. Apart from the primal chaos seal, what other divine artifact would be capable of such destructive power? However, it was also because of this that Yi Xian felt uneasy. The heavens equal divine Emperor Bell in front of him was actually the primal chaos forbidden land. If that was the case, why would the primal chaos seal, one of the 4 ultimate divine artifacts, be in the hands of an ordinary god emperor? No matter how he put it, he felt that it was a little strange. In addition, Yi Xian's current situation was not very optimistic. Because he had angered the primal chaos forbidden land, the consequences were obvious. However, to Yi Xian's surprise, just as Yi Xian felt that he might not be able to escape this time, all of these changes disappeared at the same time. In fact, everything that had disappeared just now actually returned at an extremely fast speed. Destruction and creation. Could this be the power of the primal chaos seal? A deep sense of helplessness welled up in Yi Xian's heart as he looked at the giant bell in front of him. He was so powerless in the face of the 4 ultimate divine artifacts. Kid, how is it? Do you believe that I am the primal chaos seal now? The artifact spirit said to Yi Xian again. However, this time, the primal chaos seal actually transformed into the appearance of an old man as it spoke. Yi Xian had already given up on the idea of subduing the primal chaos seal. After all, the primal chaos seal was not something Yi Xian could subdue with his current strength. Senior, please don't blame me. I was blind and did not recognize you. Yi Xian did not dare treat the primal chaos seal as a treasure anymore. Although the primal chaos seal was one of the 4 ultimate divine artifacts, it was not man-made. To be precise, the primal chaos seal could be considered a special life form. Haha, you're worth teaching. However, little fellow, it's rather boring for this old man to travel the world alone. How about this? I'll give you a test. If you can pass, I'll travel with you. How about it? The primal chaos seal's words made Yi Xian's heart skip a beat. Although the primal chaos seal had only said that he would travel with Yi Xian, if Yi Xian could really do it, the benefits he would reap would be unimaginable. Therefore, Yi Xian did not hesitate and immediately said to the primal chaos seal, "All right, senior, please give me the test." The test is very simple. There are a total of 10 laws here. If you can comprehend the origin of any one of them, you will pass. What do you think? How could there be such a good thing? How is this a test? This was practically a gift for Yi Xian. One had to know that the primal chaos seal was a supreme existence that controlled all the laws. If he allowed Yi Xian to comprehend the laws, then it would definitely be thousands of times purer than the laws that Yi Xian usually came into contact with. Not to mention that Yi Xian was able to seek the source of one of the laws. Even if Yi Xian was able to comprehend any of the laws very well, Yi Xian would still be able to obtain great benefits. Suddenly, 10 balls of light appeared in front of Yi Xian. At the same time, the primal chaos seal's voice sounded again. Kid, choose. Which of these 10 laws do you want to comprehend? If Yi Xian could make the choice himself, he would definitely say that he wanted to comprehend all 10 of the laws. In fact, Yi Xian did not expect to comprehend the origin of any of the laws in a short period of time. Therefore, for Yi Xian, being able to have the opportunity to comprehend was already a great opportunity. Yi Xian looked at the 10 laws and finally decided to choose the devouring law. After all, Yi Xian only had a decent grasp of the devouring law among the laws that Yi Xian had mastered. Senior, I will choose the devouring law. The devouring law? Kid, you have good taste. All right, go ahead and comprehend it. Following the primal chaos seal's voice, Yi Xian was suddenly transported to a mysterious place. There was only nothingness in this place. However, huge devouring vortexes could appear at any time in this nothingness. These vortexes spun rapidly, devouring everything around them. It was as if there was no concept of time in this place. Or rather, it was as if time had sped up countless times. In any case, these vortexes appeared and disappeared very quickly. In the blink of an eye, a vortex would form and disappear. Looking at these vortexes, Yi Xian had an unusual feeling in his heart. Chapter 2566. Failure. Yi Xian used his divine consciousness to examine himself but was shocked to find that his body had disappeared. He couldn't see anything. The primal chaos seal had completely integrated Yi Xian into the nomological laws. Perhaps only the primal chaos seal could do this. Integrate into the nomological laws. What a terrifying thing this was. In other words, Yi Xian was still the nomological laws, and the nomological laws were him. Yi Xian knew that it would be difficult for him to encounter such a crazy opportunity to comprehend the nomological laws in the future. Therefore, Yi Xian did not hesitate and directly immersed himself in comprehending the nomological laws. Time passed and Yi Xian continued to comprehend the nomological laws. Until one day, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. Sigh, did I fail in the end? Well, if it was so easy to trace the source of the nomological laws, then it wouldn't be so difficult to control the nomological laws. Yi Xian muttered to himself. Then, he raised his head and prepared to ask about the primal chaos seal. Unfortunately, the primal chaos seal had already disappeared. Perhaps it had planned from the start to leave after giving Yi Xian a chance to comprehend the nomological laws. Or perhaps it had really waited until it realized that Yi Xian did not have the ability to comprehend the source of the nomological laws before leaving. Yi Xian was a little disappointed but not too disappointed. After all, the primal chaos seal was one of the 4 ultimate divine weapons. It was already a great fortune to have been able to see it. Not to mention, Yi Xian's harvest this time was actually quite rich. Yi Xian's comprehension of the devouring nomological laws had improved his application of the devouring nomological laws like never before. Yi Xian waved his hand and a black ball appeared in his hand. However, this ball did not dissipate and continued to absorb the surrounding spiritual energy. After a while, it actually condensed into a spirit stone. What was the devouring nomological laws? What was the use of the devouring nomological laws? Yi Xian had never considered so many things before, but this enlightenment made him understand a lot. It could be said that this time, not only had his comprehension of the origin of the devouring law improved greatly, but in fact with this experience, Yi Xian's comprehension of the other laws would improve greatly. Moreover, Yi Xian had once obtained the Heart of Origin. In addition, Yi Xian had a special constitution that allowed him to comprehend all laws. It could be said that Yi Xian had gained a lot from this one session of enlightenment. Shaking his head helplessly, Yi Xian walked away. At this moment, the auras that were monitoring him had all disappeared. Perhaps those people monitoring him had all disappeared after the primal chaos seal struck them. Or perhaps, those people sensed the terrifying auras here and fled. But no matter what, there was no one watching him right now, so Yi Xian naturally had to check on Luoluo and the other 2. He didn't know if Miya and Fian had met up with Luoluo yet. Yi Xian moved extremely quickly. Although he didn't feel it himself, anyone familiar with him would realize that Yi Xian's grasp of the origin of space had improved imperceptibly. Every step he took contained the power of the origin of space. With every step he took, the power of the origin of space would naturally rise under his feet, allowing him to move further and faster. However, Yi Xian didn't realize these problems yet. Yi Xian moved extremely quickly. In just a few days, he had found Luoluo and the others. Relying on the special connection between him and Luoluo, Yi Xian could easily find her no matter where she was. What appeared in front of Yi Xian was no longer the valley from before. Instead, it was a rather desolate place. There were no mountains or rivers here. There were only withered rocks and weeds. At a glance, it was incomparably desolate. It turned out that although Luoluo could easily kill those who went to the valley to cause trouble, Luoluo didn't like trouble. Therefore, she directly left that place. At this moment, the 3 women built a stone fortress in this desolate place. They lived in it and silently cultivated. He's here. Luoluo opened her eyes and said softly. Yes, he's almost here. Fian also opened her eyes. Miya immediately stood up. Although she didn't have the special connection ability of Luoluo and Fian, she knew who he was in the end. Yi Xian didn't care much about the cultivation environment. However, at this moment, seeing the 3 women cultivating in such a desolate place, he frowned slightly. At this moment, the 3 women had already seen Yi Xian. However, what puzzled them was that Yi Xian didn't walk over. Instead, he stood in the same place. Yi Xian casually waved his hand. From his hand, a screen of light quickly covered 100 miles around the stone fortress. A strange scene occurred. Trees immediately grew out of it. There were also countless flowers and spirit herbs. In the blink of an eye, the 100 miles around them had turned into a place with birds chirping and flowers fragrant. However, Luoluo, Miya, and Fian all widened their eyes. Perhaps many people could accelerate the growth of trees, but there were probably not many who could do it as casually as Yi Xian. Moreover, how could those birds and beasts be explained? One had to know that there were no living things here. How could Yi Xian create life with a wave of his hand? This scene was too shocking for the three women. However, they didn't know that Yi Xian was also quite shocked at this moment. Originally, he only wanted to use the law of life to improve the environment here. He didn't expect to create new life. This ability was simply beyond Yi Xian's expectations. It wasn't until this moment that Yi Xian realized that his comprehension of the law of devour had greatly improved the power of his other laws. Even the laws that Yi Xian hadn't comprehended before became very easy to obtain. In fact, Yi Xian was only one step away from comprehending the origin of the law of devour. If he took that step, Yi Xian would be able to truly comprehend the true origin of the law of devour. Unfortunately, that step wasn't so easy to take. After all, comprehending the origin of one law was only one step away from comprehending the origin of all the other laws. The comprehension of laws was actually related to each other. If one comprehended them more deeply, the power of the laws they grasped would be richer. This was because as long as one comprehended one of the laws deeply, one would be able to easily obtain the rest of the laws without much effort. This was the so-called coherence of laws. Chapter 2567. Visit. There were only 4 ultimate divine weapons in the world and only 1 primal chaos seal. Perhaps one might not be as lucky as Yi Xian to obtain the opportunity to comprehend the laws of nature bestowed by the primal chaos seal even in millions or even tens of millions of years. After Yi Xian saw the 3 girls, he didn't explain too much about what had happened to him. In any case, to the 3 girls, Yi Xian's strength was equivalent to their strength. After staying here for more than half a month, Yi Xian could only leave in the end. After all, Yi Xian didn't want to arouse the city lord's suspicion. After all, if the city lord became suspicious, he might track down the whereabouts of Luo and the other 2 girls. Yi Xian didn't find anything special when he returned to the Yi residence. However, Yi Xian knew that someone would come to question him very soon. Sure enough, as Yi Xian had expected, the old steward quickly came to Yi Xian's side. "Master, you're finally back. Did you go out to cultivate for more than half a year? This old servant hasn't seen you come back for more than half a year." More than half a year? Was it very long? If it were anyone else, they would have cultivated in seclusion for decades, centuries, or even thousands of years. It seemed that this old steward wasn't suitable for such a task. Fortunately, Yi Xian had intended to let the city lord know. Otherwise, he would have seen through his tricks. "Oh, I went out this time because I came across an opportunity and was delayed for a while." "How was it? Did anything happen in the residence during this time?" Yi Xian said calmly. This explanation was enough. "Master, about a month after you left, the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang sent an invitation saying that he wanted to meet with you." As he spoke, the old steward handed the invitation to Yi Xian. The Azure Dragon Gang wanted to meet with him? What was the meaning of this? Yi Xian was a little puzzled. At the moment, Yi Xian didn't know that the people who had been sent to cause trouble for him were the Azure Dragon Gang. Yi Xian only knew about the clues in the oil forest. Therefore, Yi Xian didn't suspect anything. He just took the invitation and walked out. After all, the Azure Dragon Gang was one of the major powers on the first level. Therefore, Yi Xian felt the need to befriend them. Yi Xian soon arrived at the Azure Dragon Gang leader's residence. "Leader, there's someone outside calling himself Yi Xian. He said that he wants to see you." Yi Xian. The gang leader of the Azure Dragon Gang suddenly opened his eyes wide. Back then, when he sent people to kill Yi Xian, he originally thought that he would definitely win. But after that, not a single one of his people returned. This indeed caused him to be puzzled for a few days. He thought that the city lord's mansion had sent people to secretly protect Yi Xian and kill his people. However, he heard that Yi Xian had mysteriously disappeared. Even the city lord's residents couldn't find his whereabouts. Therefore, the Azure Dragon Gang leader was happy about this for a few days. However, he didn't expect that Yi Xian would actually come again today. "Tell him to wait in the side hall. I'll be there soon," the Azure Dragon Gang leader instructed. After all, he was the one who had sent the invitation. He had sent the invitation because he wanted to test whether Yi Xian had really fallen. He didn't expect that this guy would actually come with the invitation today. "What do you think we should do?" The leader of the Azure Dragon Gang seemed to be talking to the air because there was no one in front of him at all. However, as he spoke, he saw a dark shadow appear. He couldn't see the appearance of this shadow. At first glance, he didn't even think that it was human. Of course, this was actually the Azure Dragon Gang's think tank. Yuing. Leader, since this kid is so lucky, why don't you let him go there? There. The Azure Dragon Gang leader was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted. A smile appeared on his face. Then, the shadow disappeared again. However, the Azure Dragon Gang leader already knew what to do. Xian didn't have to wait too long before he saw the Azure Dragon Gang leader walking over. Xian didn't know why the Azure Dragon Gang leader was looking for him, but he still greeted him politely. This kid is Xian. Greetings. Senior. Hee, senior, there's no need for that. With your outstanding talent, I'm afraid that it won't be long before we can address each other as equals. The Azure Dragon Gang leader looked calm on the surface, but he was extremely shocked in his heart. How long had it been? This guy had already killed a superior divine emperor in such a short time. One should know that this guy was only a hierarch when he came out from the beast hunting camp. And in this short period of less than a year, what exactly did he do? Why was the notification of his strength so fast? He had actually reached the high-grade God Emperor realm? The Azure Dragon Gang leader forcibly suppressed the shock in his heart, but he was even more certain of Xian's killing intent. May I know why Senior has called me over? Xian asked the Azure Dragon Gang leader. After all, the Azure Dragon Gang leader was the one who sent the invitation to Xian. Therefore, Xian naturally asked this question. The Azure Dragon Gang leader was looking for Xian for no reason. Previously, he just wanted to test whether Xian was still alive. However, at this moment, he already had a new arrangement. You're talking about the invitation. I originally wanted to invite you to participate in the Azure Dragon Gang's hunt. The City Lord's mansion has a hunting area, and of course, we also have our own hunting area. I saw that your talent is not bad, so I wanted to invite you to come along. However, you're not here, so I missed the opportunity. So that's how it is. Xian's heart slightly moved. He thought that the Azure Dragon Gang leader felt that his talent was outstanding and wanted to snatch him from the City Lord's mansion. So that's how it is. Then, I'm not blessed. Xian said with a smile. Although he missed the Azure Dragon Gang's hunt, Xian did not regret it. After all, his harvest during this period was not something that could be compared to a mere hunt. Let me think about it. All right. There's an area that might be suitable for you. Since I sent you the invitation, I naturally won't let you make this trip in vain. I don't want outsiders to say that the Azure Dragon Gang is stingy. However, there are some dangers in this area. I wonder if you're willing to give it a try? The Azure Dragon Gang leader seemed to deliberately not give Xian time to think, so he directly asked Xian at this moment. He deliberately said this to provoke Xian and make Xian agree. However, Xian was never afraid of any danger, so there was no need for him to provoke him. He would agree. Oh, I wonder where Senior is referring to? Chapter 2568. Mysterious Half Cave. The mysterious half cave was a very special place in the Origin Source secret realm. Ordinary people were not qualified to know about it, and those who knew about it would never dare to approach it because a group of incomparably powerful people lived there. Anyone who entered would be mysteriously sent out. If they dared to force their way in, they would undoubtedly die. In the first level, only a small number of people knew about this, and those who knew about this were the people with the highest status in the first level. Therefore, the so-called mysterious half-cave was not a place of opportunity, but a place of death. That's right, the mysterious half-cave is a little special. If you enter, I'm afraid there will be no one to guide you and you will only be sent out. Although I can give you this chance, I can't assign someone to guide you. Therefore you have to take care of yourself. As for whether you go or not, that's up to you. With a wave of his hand, a map appeared in front of Xian. Remember this map. Remember, you can't tell anyone about this map. This is a forbidden area of the Azure Dragon Gang. I'm giving you this opportunity because I see that you have decent aptitude. However, if you leak this map, then even if I think highly of you, the other elders in the gang will still cause trouble for you. Do you understand? Xian nodded. He did not suspect anything at all and completely believed the Azure Dragon Gang leader's words. All right, I understand. I will not leak this map. Yi Xian memorized the map and waved his hand, turning it into dust. All right, you can go now. Whether you can obtain the opportunity will depend on your own fate. The Azure Dragon Gang leader waved his hand, indicating for Yi Xian to leave. As for Yi Xian, he naturally wouldn't stay. Yi Xian thought about the map in his mind and immediately began to prepare. However, he did not know that this was not a place of opportunity at all. A few days later, Yi Xian set off again. This time, the people from the City Lord Manor naturally followed him. However, what puzzled Yi Xian was that after following him for a period of time, they all lost contact with him. He did not know if these people had gone into hiding, or if they had received orders to stop following Yi Xian. However, what Yi Xian didn't know was that those people had been secretly eliminated by the Azure Dragon Gang. Because the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang wanted Yi Xian dead. Naturally, he wouldn't allow these people to tell the city lord where Yi Xian was heading to, which would allow Yi Xian to learn the truth and leave. A few days later, Yi Xian arrived at a large mountain according to the map. This mountain was the entrance to the mysterious half-cave. It was said that the mysterious half-cave was located in a secret place in the sky. If one wanted to go there, one could only fly up into the sky and break through the maze to enter it. At least that was what was written on the map. Yi Xian did not suspect anything. He stood at the top of the mountain and flew up into the sky. Nothing was found in the sky. Yi Xian continued to fly up into the sky. Suddenly, Yi Xian felt as if some kind of power had swept through his body. Then, he was back at the top of the mountain. This process was silent, as if Yi Xian had not done anything at all. Time law? Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. The only thing he could think of was the power of time law. After all, only time law could send him back to his original place so easily. However, if it was the time rule, then it was a bit inappropriate. If it really was the time rule, then logically speaking, even Yi Xian's memories after that shouldn't exist. However, Yi Xian remembered very clearly that he had rushed up into the sky and was suddenly sent down from the sky. Then, could it be the power of some kind of restriction? Yi Xian pondered in his heart. However, after a while, he began a new attempt. Yi Xian flew up into the sky again quickly. This time, Yi Xian raised his vigilance and even instructed the system to maintain detection at all times. He wanted to see if he would be teleported away in such an inexplicable manner. Soon, Yi Xian returned to his previous position. A strange thing happened. Another mysterious light rose up, and Yi Xian was teleported away once again. Just like the first time, Yi Xian did not even react. However, he was already dead and returned to his original place. What was going on? Yi Xian was extremely puzzled. However, it was impossible for him to give up just like that. This time, Yi Xian did not even hesitate and flew up into the sky again. Are you done yet? Since you know this place, how dare you come here? Are you looking for death? Get out of here now. Otherwise, don't blame this old man for killing you. Suddenly, a voice entered Yi Xian's ears. Yi Xian could not help but stiffen abruptly. At the same time, he quickly released his divine senses and scanned his surroundings. Unfortunately, there was no time at all. In front of Yi Xian, within the range of Yi Xian's divine senses, there was no one. However, that sentence was so clear. Then where was that person? Where did that voice come from? Yi Xian was inexplicably shocked. He could not understand Xianxia at all. The meaning of that person's words could not be more obvious. If Yi Xian flew up into the sky again, that person would be enraged and might even kill him. Could it be that he had to give up just like that? However, Yi Xian was unwilling to give up. Since he knew that there was something special in front of him, it would be a pity not to go and take a look. Advance. Or retreat. Yi Xian hovered in mid-air, somewhat unable to make up his mind. However, right at this moment, that voice sounded again. Kid, since you are a trial apostle of the Guardians and have received the trial qualifications of the two main halls, why don't you go and train properly? What are you doing here? Is this a place where a mere apostle like you should come? What trial apostle? Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. The so-called trial qualifications of the two main halls, Yi Xian could still understand. It was probably referring to the trial opportunities bestowed upon him by the Shrine of Life and the Shrine of Darkness. However, how did he become a trial apostle of the Guardians? How could Yi Xian not know of this identity? I wonder if Senior can show me why I am a trial apostle of the Guardians? Why don't I know? Since he had doubts, and this person had reminded him twice, he probably did not have any enmity towards him. Hence, Yi Xian mustered up his courage and asked, "You don't know your identity?" Suddenly, an illusory figure appeared in front of Yi Xian. Was it actually a Dharma idol? Could it be that this Dharma idol had been talking to him all this time? Chapter 2569. The Ultimate Secret, Strange? Your aura is indeed a little unstable, but you do have the aura of one of our protectors. Logically speaking, you should be the descendant or disciple of one of our protectors. Furthermore, you should have obtained his recognition, which is why you obtained the identity of an apostle. Why do you not know? That discovery sized up Yi Xian. Looking at his appearance, he was indeed incomparably puzzled. Descendant or disciple? Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. It was obviously impossible to say that Yi Xian was the descendant of a guardian. Then, the only explanation was that he was a disciple. However, Yi Xian only had one master in the realm of the gods, and that was the 5th Hall Master of Mo Bai Jing. However, with the 5th Hall Master's cultivation level, it was impossible for him to become a guardian. Looking at the strength of the person in front of him, it was obvious that a guardian was an extremely powerful existence. He could probably crush Mo Bai Jing countless times with a single finger. No, he still had a master. That was the God Emperor's inheritance. Although he did not truly receive the God Emperor's inheritance, he did receive the aura of the God Emperor's inheritance when he received it back then. Could it be him? Could it be that his cheap master was a guardian? Or could it be that his cheap master was the true guardian trial apostle? It was only because he inherited everything from him that he was misunderstood? Yi Xian could only think of this in his heart. After all, other than this reason, Yi Xian could not think of any other reason to explain the words of the guardian in front of him. Yi Xian was puzzled, but how could that person not be puzzled? The guardian silently observed Yi Xian's aura and realized that Yi Xian did indeed have the aura of a trial apostle, but it was a little faint and was from a long time ago. And with Yi Xian's age, he should not have such an ancient aura. You do have the aura of a guardian trial apostle. Who is your master? The guardian asked directly. Yi Xian really didn't know how to answer this question, so he could only say, "Senior, this junior's master has already immortalized. This junior doesn't even know his name." So that's how it is. If that's the case, it makes sense. Since that's the case, you can come up. After saying this, Yi Xian quickly flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xian arrived at a strange place. This was a void. Even when Yi Xian turned around, he could still see the Source Secret Realm. As for this place, it was a palace that floated outside the Source Secret Realm. "Come in, kid." A voice rang out. Yi Xian did not hesitate and immediately walked towards the palace. There was nothing special about the palace. It was just that the people living in it were not simple. At this moment, the old man had already stood up. Following his movements, Yi Xian could even hear a series of crackling sounds. Yi Xian knew that this divine domain had appeared because the old man had not been active for too long. The old man indifferently looked at Yi Xian and said, "It's true that you're my guardian's trial apostle. However, you were planted with a seed by the Keeper of Order. Brat, you sure are lucky to be able to survive after encountering the Keeper of Order." The old man said indifferently and then waved his hand. Yi Xian did not feel anything, but he knew that the Keeper of Order's seed had most likely disappeared. This junior is Yi Xian. Greetings. Senior. Dare I ask, what exactly are the guardians and keepers of order? When he heard Yi Xian's question, the old man unexpectedly laughed out loud. Haha, your question is the most ridiculous question I have heard in hundreds of thousands of years. As a trial apostle of the guardians, you don't even know what the guardians and keepers of order are. I don't know what kind of luck you have to be able to survive until now. We, the guardians, protect this Source Secret Realm and the entire Divine Realm continent. Without us, the Divine Realm continent would have collapsed long ago. There are a total of 12 guardians, and we rotate every 10 million years. As for the enforcers of order, they are a bunch of arrogant people. Their goal is to create a new order, and they are trying to change everything in the Divine Realm. They can be considered the sworn enemies of us guardians. These bastards are so full of themselves that they don't place the sovereign in their eyes at all. The sovereign has been sleeping for 30 million years, and will probably wake up soon. 30 million years ago, the protectors of that generation sacrificed 10 people to seal the sovereign away and put him to sleep. But these keepers of order know nothing, and yet they keep trying to change the order of things. Sigh, it's really sad. Don't these guys know that once the new order is established, the ruler will be able to obtain new energy? If the ruler wakes up, whether it's us, them, or the entire god realm, we will all be destroyed. What was going on? Yi Xian was at a loss. At this moment, Yi Xian had no idea what was going on. What kind of vortex had he been dragged into? What guardians? What keepers of order? Yi Xian had never heard of them before. As for the ruler, Yi Xian had never heard of them before. Senior, may I ask what the ruler is? Is he a person? You're right. The Sovereign Lord is truly a person. No one knows how long the Sovereign Lord has existed, because he's simply too powerful. Unfortunately, for some reason, the Sovereign Lord wants to destroy everything in time and reconstruct the world. That's why we can only do our best to resist. The ruler cannot be killed because he is the ruler of the gods, the ruler of all things. All we can do is put him into a deep sleep. Forget it, forget it. Why am I telling you this? If you become a guardian one day, you will naturally know what you need to know. All right, little guy, go back to your trial. Ascend to the 999th floor of the Origin Secret Realm as soon as possible. I will wait for you there. Only when you reach the 9th floor will you be considered to have passed the trial. Only then will you have the right to know more. Now go back. The old man waved his hand and Yi Xian appeared at the top of the mountain again. It was as if everything that had just happened had been an illusion. However, Yi Xian knew full well that it hadn't been an illusion. It had really happened. Guardian, keeper of order, ruler. For a moment, Yi Xian was at a loss. It was as if, ever since he'd entered the Origin Secret Realm, he'd experienced something special again and again. For example, the words of the Guardian were enough to make Yi Xian extremely confused. Chapter 2570. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio ambushed. It was as if the vast Origin Source Secret Realm was merely a training ground for the Guardians. As for the people inside, Yi Xian actually found them rather pitiful. Perhaps the entire Origin Source Secret Realm was merely a place for a few or even a single cultivator to train. The people in the Origin Source Secret Realm treated it as their everything, but they did not know that it was merely a training ground. Of course, even if Yi Xian knew all this, it was useless. Unless he could one day ascend to the 199th level, he would be nothing more than a nameless pawn in the Origin Source Secret Realm. Yi Xian walked silently towards the city, but his heart was in turmoil. At this moment, Yi Xian's attention was completely focused on the old man's words, so he did not notice the situation around him. At this moment, there were already a few people following Yi Xian, and their divine senses had already locked onto Yi Xian. It was obvious that these people did not come with good intentions. As it turned out, since the Azure Dragon Gang's leader intended to send Yi Xian to his death, how could he not have prepared a backup plan? These people were sent by the Azure Dragon Gang's leader to prevent Yi Xian from escaping. The mission they received was very simple. If Yi Xian came down from the mountain, kill him without mercy. At this moment, Yi Xian had not realized that danger was about to befall him, so he was completely unprepared. It was obvious that the Azure Dragon Gang had sent people who were adept at concealment this time. Of course, this was also because Yi Xian had not activated the system's detection function. Otherwise, even if these people were good at concealment, what could they do? In front of the system's detection, these people had nowhere to hide. Unfortunately, Yi Xian had not activated the system. After all, the system's power was limited. Suddenly, Yi Xian became alert. In an instant, the god-slaying sword flew out without hesitation. Boom! A deafening boom resounded. What surprised Yi Xian was that the god-slaying sword had actually struck an incomparably mysterious and transparent place. It was as if he had cut through the air. Yi Xian was astonished. After all, he had clearly felt some kind of power attack him just now. Furthermore, judging from his current reaction, it seemed like he was already surrounded by some kind of restriction or domain. After all, even though the god-slaying sword had missed, the power of the god-slaying sword's powerful attack had been neutralized in mid-air. Naturally, it could be seen that Yi Xian was surrounded by restrictive spells. The Law Divine Bow had already appeared in Yi Xian's hands, and a black sphere was faintly discernible beside Yi Xian. Yi Xian was waiting for the person who ambushed him to come out on his own. Since they intended to ambush him, Yi Xian believed that they wouldn't waste their time with him. Sure enough, just as Yi Xian was deep in thought, there was another change in the surroundings. Wisps of black smoke constantly rose around Yi Xian. These wisps of black smoke did not seem to be a threat at all. They moved freely with the wind, just like the green smoke that came from the remains of a divine tree that had been burned by a wildfire. It was so casual. However, when Yi Xian saw this scene, he instinctively became alert. There was something wrong with this black smoke. There was no fire anywhere in this place. Furthermore, this black smoke was too strange. What exactly was it? Yi Xian did not dare to act rashly. After all, this was a situation that Yi Xian had never encountered before. System, detect what that black smoke is. Yi Xian instructed the system. Ding! System notification. Target has been identified. Soul Snatcher and Life 6 Ultimate Smoke. System notification. Host, please take note. This smoke is extremely poisonous and can affect one's soul. The host is advised to avoid it immediately. Soul Snatcher and Life 6 Ultimate Smoke? What a long name. However, just from this name alone, one could tell that this black smoke was not simple. Yi Xian's figure moved and immediately retreated. However, before Yi Xian could retreat, he had no choice but to stop in his tracks. This was because he could not retreat at all. This is not good. I can't break through the surrounding restrictions. Yi Xian was aghast. Without realizing it, he had fallen into a huge trap. The surrounding restrictions were clearly constructed using special methods. Yi Xian could not do anything about it at the moment. It could be said that even if Yi Xian had a way to break through it through the system, it would take time. However, the black smoke had only appeared for a short while before it spread rapidly. The person who ambushed Yi Xian actually wanted to use this method to trap Yi Xian to death. Damn it! Yi Xian was furious. At this moment, it could be said that Yi Xian was in extreme danger. It had only taken a moment for him to go from alert to passive. With a wave of his hand, a strong surge of divine power rushed out. Yi Xian wanted to try and see if he could disperse the black smoke. Unfortunately, how could the 6 extinction smoke, which stole souls and scattered lives, be so easily dispelled? It could be said that Yi Xian's attack was completely ineffective. Even though Yi Xian had already spread out his divine power, the black smoke was able to ignore the existence of divine power. On the surface, the black smoke looked like it could be blown away by the wind. However, it was completely unaffected by external forces and continued to spread. It could be said that once the black smoke got close to Yi Xian would not be able to resist it. Damn it! Who dares to play tricks in the dark? Come out if you have the ability! Yi Xian roared. Unfortunately, no one responded to him. This time, the gang leader of the Azure Dragon Gang had personally sent his men. How could they be so simple? In reality, if Yi Xian was directly killed by the black smoke, it would be fine. Even if he was not, those people would immediately appear and deal a fatal blow to Yi Xian. Deity Vanquishing Slash. Yi Xian suddenly waved his hand and controlled the god-slaying sword in mid-air, sending out a powerful attack. Boom! There was a loud sound, but there was no movement. This seal could absorb damage. Unless Yi Xian could unleash an attack that could destroy the seal in one go, it would be impossible for him to break the seal. Yi Xian felt a bit anxious as he looked at the attack that immediately dispersed like a ripple. As the black smoke increased, the speed at which it spread also increased. Yi Xian knew very well that once the black smoke filled the seal, there would be no way for him to escape. Damn it! I don't believe that there is no way. God-slaying sword. 10,000 swords return to one. Yi Xian roared. In an instant, the god-slaying sword exploded with a powerful light. In just a moment, it had turned into 10,000 swords that charged into the sky. Attack! At Yi Xian's command, the god-slaying sword immediately attacked in all directions. Boom! 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 The terrifying attack covered the entire space. However, it had no effect at all. The only gain was to let Yi Xian know that this place was actually less than 100 miles wide. In other words, Yi Xian was trapped within this 100-mile radius by the seal. With a wave of his hand, the heavenly bow disappeared. Following that, Yi Xian's hand shone with light. The seal in his left hand, and the heavenly talisman in his right. Chapter 2571. Chapter 2571. Chapter 2571. Chapter 2571 Soul Reaping Powder 6 Extinction Smoke. The resources produced by the ancient zither space had been accumulated over this period of time. Although it was not much, it was enough for one use. Yi Xian's hands continuously transformed into rays of light, and his speed was already incomparably fast. This was because Yi Xian knew in his heart that if he couldn't quickly refine something that could break this restriction, then he would probably die here this time. The soul-stealing 6 Extinction Smoke was not as simple as its name suggested. Even though its name was also extremely terrifying, it was not as simple as its name. The 6 Extinction Smoke could corrode one's soul, making one feel the intense pain of having their soul corroded. Then, it would absorb one's life force. No matter how strong one's life force was, as long as the black smoke didn't disperse, it would continue to be absorbed. Moreover, as life force was continuously absorbed, the black smoke would become stronger and stronger. These were not the key. The key was the 6 absolutes. The so-called 6 absolutes refer to the 7 absolutes. The black smoke was able to seal off all sensory abilities of the person who was being eroded. Even divine sense was no exception. Absolute divine power. The black smoke was able to convert all the divine power in the surroundings into its own power. In this way, those who were surrounded would naturally not be able to absorb divine power. Absolute law. The soul-seizing 6 life-extinguishing smoke could temporarily seal off the power of the laws that enveloped him. The power of the laws did not disappear, but because of the black smoke, they could not be used. Despairing of the mind. Consciousness was a person's thoughts. However, if one was surrounded by the black smoke, then no matter how strong one was, one's consciousness would be continuously stripped away by the black smoke. In the end, one would lose all consciousness and be killed by the black smoke. Cut off the fate of the heavens. This could be said to be a very mysterious existence. The so-called fate of the heavens was something that could not be seen or touched. After all, how could something like luck be explained? However, this black smoke had a special ability to end one's destiny. No one knew how it did this. Perhaps it was because the black smoke itself contained some special laws. In addition to the 5 absolutes, the last absolute was the most terrifying one. That was because the last absolute was the absolute of life and death. The so-called absolute life and death meant that once one was enveloped by the black smoke, one's life and death would be beyond one's control. Even if one could not withstand the torment of the black smoke and wanted to commit suicide, one would not be able to do so. Once surrounded by this black smoke, even the resurrection ability would disappear. It was a terrifying black smoke. Although the conditions to unleash this black smoke were very harsh, and it was usually very difficult to truly unleash it, once it was unleashed, it would be incomparably terrifying. Yi Xian had never expected that his luck would be so bad. Not only was he surrounded by restrictions, but he had also triggered this black smoke. The light in Yi Xian's hand didn't delay at all. Divine talismans appeared in his hand one after another. At the same time, a restriction was formed. This time, both the restriction and the talisman were specially made by Yi Xian. It could be said that even before the refinement, Yi Xian had not been confident at all. Fortunately, he succeeded. This time, the restriction that Yi Xian had refined was actually something that Yi Xian had refined based on his own ideas. It could even be considered his own invention. Yi Xian had previously comprehended the devouring nomological law through the chaos restriction. Although he had not truly grasped the origin power of the devouring nomological law, it had greatly increased the power of the devouring nomological law. Therefore, Yi Xian now had the ability to refine this special restriction. This restriction had been completely invented by Yi Xian himself. Its general function was to reflect the devouring power. What was a reflection of the devouring power? In other words, this restriction could devour anything that got close to it, regardless of whether it was divine power or special abilities. After devouring anything, it would directly throw it into the void. Yi Xian's idea was very simple. No matter how strong this black smoke was, if he repelled it from his side and prevented it from getting close to him, wouldn't that mean that there would be no danger? As for where the black smoke would be thrown to, there were many places that Yi Xian could choose from. For example, when Yi Xian had been in the Kunlun divine realm, he had encountered a desolate region. In that desolate region, there was an ancient destroyer organization's main hall. Vaguely, one could see people moving around inside. Destroyer organization was not a good thing anyway. In that case, Yi Xian would not feel the slightest bit of hesitation when he lured the black smoke there. Since Yi Xian did not have the ability to charge into the restriction back then, why not use the black smoke to destroy that ancient destroyer organization's main hall now? The members of destroyer organization should not have existed in the first place. Although the members of destroyer organization hidden in the mystic region could not come out now, they would be a disaster sooner or later. Therefore, it was better to use this opportunity to destroy them. However, the black smoke had the special effect of an absolute law. Therefore, Yi Xian had no choice but to use a divine talisman to supplement the restriction of the law of devouring. The divine talisman that Yi Xian had refined this time was actually not of a very high level. However, its effect was definitely very suitable for the current situation. This was because Yi Xian had refined a traction divine talisman. The traction divine talisman was like its name. Its main ability was to guide the target. Yi Xian had placed this traction divine talisman in the devouring restriction. Then, it would continuously guide the black smoke from afar and devour it. Perhaps the law of devouring this time should be called the law of transport. After all, once the black smoke was devoured, it would fall into the mystic region where the ancient destroyer organization was located. Perhaps it would be difficult for others to do this, but Yi Xian could do it. This was because Yi Xian's understanding of the law of devouring was already very profound. Soon, the restriction that was combined with the power of the divine talisman was finally set up. Wisps of black smoke continued to spread towards Yi Xian, but they were all immediately pulled in by the divine talisman. The restriction devoured them and they disappeared without a trace. For the time being, Yi Xian was considered to be safe. However, it was not that easy for Yi Xian to be truly safe. After all, if the enemy's restriction outside was not removed, then Yi Xian could only be trapped inside. Yi Xian quickly thought of a countermeasure. Yi Xian did not even know what kind of restriction was outside, so it was indeed a little tricky. However, as long as Yi Xian was given time, then Yi Xian was confident that he could break this restriction. However, would he really give Yi Xian time to lose face? Obviously not. The enemy's goal this time was to kill Yi Xian. At this moment, seeing that the black smoke was blocked by Yi Xian and could not be of any use, they had already made a new move. Yi Xian was thinking of a way to break this special restriction when he suddenly saw a few figures appear in the distance. These people approached quickly without saying a word. Yi Xian already knew that they were probably the people who had ambushed him. Who are you? Why are you ambushing me? Chapter 2572. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios Combination Restriction. It was a restriction. It turned out that there was a person who was proficient in restrictions among these people. Furthermore, the restriction that this person set up was very strange. It could be said that Yi Xian had never seen such a thing before. Whether it was the method of setting it up or the restriction that he set up, it was very strange in Yi Xian's eyes. Generally speaking, the basic step of creating a restriction was to purify the essence of the required resources, then use a secret method to combine these essences into a restriction. However, the person in front of him was different. The method that he used was something that Yi Xian had never seen before. Purifying the essences of the resources at the same time was nothing much, but this person was actually able to combine the essences of the resources at the same time while purifying them. It could be said that in terms of efficiency it was much higher. This guy had mastered a special method to refine restrictive spells. After a short while, a restriction was formed, and it was an offensive restriction. The person waved his hand and the newly created restriction merged with the restriction that was trapping Yi Xian. In an instant, the entire restriction changed. Originally, there was nothing special about the restriction, but now, it was like an illusion. The sky was actually dark with specks of starlight. Even though Yi Xian knew that this was just an illusion, Yi Xian still had a bad feeling about it. Perhaps it was to verify Yi Xian's guess, but after a short while, the restriction changed again. In the sky, the specks of starlight were constantly changing, appearing extremely unstable. Then, all the starlight crashed towards the ground. Damn it, this is a combination restriction. That guy can actually add combinations to a restriction. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly, and the god-slaying sword in his hand flew out. Huge meteorites crashed towards Yi Xian. Not all of them would hit Yi Xian, but even if one or two of them hit Yi Xian, it would be enough for Yi Xian to suffer. Therefore at this moment, Yi Xian did not dare to delay. Under Wei Tian's control, the god-slaying sword continued to unleash powerful attacks. These attacks shattered the Death Stars one by one. Within this restriction, it was like the end of the world. In the sky, burning meteorite fragments kept falling down, igniting everything around Yixian. The flames were burning, the black smoke was hazy, and the ground was trembling and cracking from the continuous bombardment. Those meteorites were naturally not just meteorites. They were special meteorites that had been reinforced with various laws. In particular, the two types of meteorites that had been reinforced with the laws of toughness and the laws of gravity were the most frightening. It could be said that every single attack felt like the world was splitting apart. After that, there was another type of meteorite that worried Yixian the most. It was the fainting meteorite that had been reinforced by the space law. This type of meteorite would always mysteriously appear and then mysteriously disappear, making it impossible for Yixian to guard against it. One move. With just one move, Yixian had been forced into a passive state. The Law Divine Bow in Yixian's hand was also constantly being pulled. One Law Divine arrow after another continuously flew out from the Law Divine Bow, shattering the meteors. At this moment, Yixian was completely focused. After all, the enemy was really too strong. Yixian started to think of a countermeasure. These meteorite attacks were not really a big threat to Yixian. The key was the people outside. Clearly, the reason those people were not making a move was not because they wanted to let Yixian off, but because they were waiting for an opportunity to deal a fatal blow to Yixian. Yixian quickly thought of all the methods he could use. However, he realized that there was simply no way to get out of this predicament. Yixian was now completely surrounded by the restriction. No matter what he wanted to do, the most important thing was that Yixian had to walk out of this restriction first. Therefore, Yixian could only wait. He had to wait for the enemy to make the first move. Since these people had said that they wanted to kill Yixian, they would definitely not let him off easily. If they wanted to make a move, they would have to enter the restriction. Then, the restriction would be broken. Therefore, Yixian was waiting. He was waiting for the enemy to break the restriction themselves. Boom! A meteorite fragment directly struck Yixian, causing him to be in an incomparably miserable state. It was to the extent that Yixian even spat out a mouthful of blood. Boom! Another meteorite fragment hit Yixian. This time, the Rule Divine Bow in Yixian's hand was sent flying. Then, he put away his Rule Divine Bow with great difficulty. The enemy outside the restriction watched all this silently. Nobody said anything. Suddenly, perhaps because they felt that the time was right, the restriction master waved his hand. A few powerhouses immediately rushed towards the restriction. It turned out that the restriction master was the real commander of these people. Yixian, who had looked like he was on the verge of death, suddenly brightened up. Just as the restriction was broken and these people were about to enter, Yixian's figure suddenly moved. He activated the infinite blink, and in an instant, he had already rushed out of the encirclement of the restriction. Die! Two of the enemies saw Yixian's movement and immediately attacked. However, Yixian's movements were too sudden. A moment ago, he looked like he was on the verge of death. He could not hold the magic treasure in his hand firmly. A moment later, he burst out with all his strength. Naturally, they could not help but feel a little relaxed. It could be said that these people from the Azure Dragon Gang were very disciplined. Unfortunately, they had been taken advantage of by Yixian. Everything that had happened before was actually an illusion that Yixian had deliberately created. Because of his deeper understanding of the laws, although Yixian's realm did not increase, his strength had increased a lot. These guys had not been careless and had gone all out. Unfortunately, they had miscalculated. Yixian moved and arrived beside the restriction master in the blink of an eye. This restriction master was just a pure restriction master. He was not like Yixian, who used restrictions as a means of support. Therefore, when Yixian approached him, he did not resist at all. Boom! He punched out. Yixian did not use the God Slayer or other magic treasures. Yixian wanted to keep this person alive. Yixian wanted to understand the special restriction refining method from this person. 10,000 swords in one. Yixian roared. The God Slayer immediately burst out with powerful sword light and attacked those people in an instant. Eternal Night Field. Absolute Zero. Restriction Explode. At the same time, Yixian continuously sent out 2 attacks to stop the enemies from advancing. He even detonated the devouring restriction that was still in the middle of the restriction. The powerful force caused that part of the world to completely collapse in an instant. Chapter 2573. The Azure Dragon Gang's trump card Yi Xian was not stupid. He knew that these people were strong, so why would he stay and wait for death? Moreover, he already had what he wanted, the Restriction Master. Why was it said that the Restriction Master was what Yi Xian wanted the most? It was because of the Restriction Master's special restriction technique, and the combination of restrictions that he had mastered. In terms of Yi Xian's escaping speed, no one could compare to him. After all, once the infinite teleportation was activated, his speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, those people were shocked to find that Yi Xian was no longer in front of them. Just as they were about to give chase, they found that Yi Xian was not even within the range of their divine sense. That speed left them speechless and astonished. That was because the Restriction Master's identity was not simple. The Restriction Master was one of the Azure Dragon Gang's greatest trump cards. The reason why the Azure Dragon Gang was able to make the City Lord respect them was not only because of the Azure Dragon Gang's leader's strength, but also because of the Restriction Master. The Restriction Master was an existence that had obtained a special ancient inheritance. This person was extremely talented in restriction cultivation, but his temperament was extremely strange. It could be said that the Azure Dragon Gang had never really controlled this guy. Instead, they controlled what he wanted the most, which was the Restriction Master and special resources. More than half of the special resources that the Azure Dragon Gang collected were for this guy's use. In the Azure Dragon Gang, no one knew this guy's name. Instead, everyone called him Elder Jean. This was because even this guy did not know his own name. In his mind, there was only the Restriction Master. At this moment, Elder Jean had been taken away. How could those people not know that they would be severely punished? However, they had no choice but to return. What? You're saying that Elder Jean was taken away by that guy? The Azure Dragon Gang's leader was furious. Elder Jean was his trump card because the Restriction Master had set up was extremely strong. If he was given enough time, even the Azure Dragon Gang's leader would not be able to do anything to him. However, Elder Jean had been taken away by a little guy. How could the Azure Dragon Gang's leader accept this? You bunch of trash, what's the point of keeping you around? With a wave of his hand, all of them died at the same time. These people from the Azure Dragon Gang could be considered the elites of the Azure Dragon Gang. However, compared to Elder Jean, they were simply worthless. At this moment, when the Azure Dragon Gang's leader found out that Elder Jean had been captured by Yi Xian, he was enraged and actually killed all of these experts. One had to know, among these people, there was a Supreme Divine Lord. He actually killed him just like that. Of course, Yi Xian didn't know this. Yi Xian and the Dong clan were very fast. They took Elder Jean and fled far away. In order not to cause unnecessary trouble, Yi Xian didn't look for Luo. Instead, he chose a random direction and fled. At this moment, Yi Xian's location was in an abnormally dark mountain. With a wave of his hand, several flames lit up the entire cave. At this time, Yi Xian woke the man up. Originally, Yi Xian was prepared to directly strip this fellow of his divine deity fragment, but after thinking about it for a while, he decided to forget about it. This fellow had a special restriction and refining method, so in Yi Xian's heart, he should also be an arrogant person. If he were to rashly strip off his divine deity fragment, Yi Xian was worried that this person would rather die than submit to him. Therefore, Yi Xian didn't do anything. Of course, not stripping the man's quintessence fragment didn't mean that Yi Xian didn't take any precautions. At this moment, Yi Xian had already placed several restrictions on the man's body to prevent him from doing something unwise when he woke up. However, when Yi Xian woke the man up, the result was beyond Yi Xian's expectations. Because the man didn't make any noise at all. Instead, he looked at Yi Xian curiously. Were you the one who placed the restrictions on my body? Elder Jean asked Yi Xian directly. Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. This guy was his prisoner, yet he was so calm and collected. Instead, he asked him about it. Yi Xian nodded and said, "Yes, I did. What's wrong?" "Hey, kid, are you an idiot? How can you use a restriction created by the law of devour? The law of devour itself represents the power of devouring. If you made it into a restriction, it might be able to seal me at first. However, as time passes, the laws of primal chaos will devour each other. Doesn't that mean the seal will break on its own before long? Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. Was this guy really that stupid, or was he just pretending? Now that he'd trapped him with a restriction, he wasn't thinking about how to escape, but was instead thinking about the loopholes in his restriction? After all, he was the one who was being sealed right now. However, he was actually telling Yi Xian about the loopholes in his seal. Was he afraid that Yi Xian's seal wasn't perfect enough? Yi Xian was quite speechless, but he still asked, "Then what do you think should be done?" The man looked at Yi Xian and said directly, "Since you want to seal me, it's not impossible to use the law of devour as a restriction. However, if you use the law of devour as a restriction, first of all, you can't seal my entire body like you're doing now. Instead, you should use the law of devour to create a small devouring restriction on my sea of qi, spirit points, meridians, and other places. In this way, these small restrictions will constantly absorb the divine power and law power in my body, so I won't have the chance to condense any power. Moreover, there will be a certain distance between each small restriction, so they won't consume each other. Of course, it would be best if you added some special method to make them devour life force. This way, I can only be in a weakened state." Yi Xian was quite speechless. Indeed, this guy's method was definitely feasible, and the effects were much better. However, the most important thing was that the one being sealed was himself. He actually wanted to teach Yi Xian how to seal himself more perfectly. Wasn't this the same as slapping himself in the face? How did this guy think of this? Before Yi Xian could say anything, the man continued, "Kid, do you have the rainbow stone, soul return wood, 9 transformations golden lotus, and falling pear flower?" Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. He didn't know what he was going to do, but with a wave of his hand, several resources appeared. "I don't have those you mentioned, but I do have the rainbow soul stone, soul-snatching divine wood, Kuan Qian boundary stone, and 100 changes spirit grass." "Ancient resources, you actually have ancient resources. Quick, give them to me," the man said excitedly. However, Yi Xian was stunned. Did this guy really not understand his current situation? "You want me to give you these resources? Why should I give them to you?" Chapter 2574. Elder Jin's Strange Appearance. At this moment, that person was slightly startled. However, unlike what Yi Xian had imagined, this person was actually thinking about what he should offer in exchange instead of considering his own restrictions. "I understand. This is for you, as an exchange." That person casually waved his hand and a jade talisman flew towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian caught it and glanced at it, but his expression became even more strange. Because this person had given him the special method of refining restrictions that Yi Xian wanted so much. What the hell is this guy thinking? However, since he was willing to exchange, Yi Xian did not hesitate. He casually tossed the 4 resources to that person. However, what happened next left Yi Xian in disbelief. This was because Yi Xian actually saw that Elder Jin was actually able to start refining restrictions without using his divine power or the power of the laws. He was using formations as a means to refine restrictions. Moreover, that formation was carved directly into the ground in the form of runes, and then injected with divine power from spirit stones. What kind of person was this guy? Formations could be used to refine restrictions? This was simply unimaginable, but he had done it. A moment later, a light flashed, and the restrictions on Elder Jin's body were undone. Yi Xian watched this scene the entire time and didn't interrupt him. This was because Yi Xian wasn't afraid at all. Even if the seal on this fellow's body was broken, with his strength, he'd be subdued by Yi Xian before he even had the time to release the seal. Therefore, Yi Xian wanted to see what exactly Elder Jin was up to. After breaking the restrictions on his body, Elder Jin did not even look at Yi Xian and immediately went to study the ancient resources. At this moment, Yi Xian finally understood in his heart that he'd probably encountered an idiot. Of course, this fool did not mean that Elder Jin was stupid, but that he lacked a brain. Yi Xian knew that there were some people who would forget everything else once they focused on one thing. Elder Jin was obviously a person who was obsessed with restrictions. In his eyes, there was nothing but restrictions. In his heart, restrictions were everything. However, there was another advantage to this kind of person. They were absolutely no threat. Because in their eyes, they only cared about their own things and their own world. They did not care about anything else. Yi Xian silently watched this guy refine the resources and then refine a restriction. Yi Xian did not stop him. He just wanted to know what kind of restriction he was refining. After a moment, Elder Jean finished refining everything in his hand and said, "Kid, look, this restriction is also refined with the law of devouring. Can you see what is so special about it?" Yi Xian was stunned. This guy had just handed him a newly refined restriction? Yi Xian casually took it. It was an incomparably mysterious light. There seemed to be some kind of change in the light, but unfortunately, Yi Xian could not understand it. "I can see that there are some changes in it, but I don't understand what those changes are." "Hee, it's good that you don't understand. This is an unpredictable restriction. I used the resources you gave me and combined them with the power of the law of devouring to make this restriction into a random ceiling restriction. The function of this restriction is that once it is activated, all changes are unpredictable. In other words, you can't break it at all. More importantly, it also contains the power of the law of devouring, so all external forces will be devoured." Yi Xian was stunned. There was actually such a ceiling restriction? An unbreakable restriction? What a terrifying existence. However, this person had just casually thrown such a restriction to him. "Kid, do you still have any special resources? Quick, give them to me. I'll study a few restrictions." The man looked at Yi Xian and directly stretched out his hand to ask for resources from Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian already had a new idea in his heart. This person might be able to be of use to him. What this guy cared about the most was only resources, because he wholeheartedly wanted to research new restrictions. In that case, perhaps Yi Xian could directly take him into the zither space, and then have him provide him with an endless stream of special restrictions in the zither space. "I do have some ancient resources, but they are not on me. They are somewhere else. Do you want to go?" Yi Xian asked Elder Jean. Originally, Yi Xian thought that no matter what this person said, he would hesitate for a moment. However, he didn't expect that he would directly reply without thinking. "Sure, where? Where is it? Quickly bring me there." "Okay, I'll take you there now, but you have to relax your divine sense. You can't resist at all. Can you?" Before Yi Xian could finish his words, he found that this guy had already given up resisting. He even withdrew the divine power that automatically protected his body. Yi Xian shook his head helplessly. It was really rare to meet such a strange person. Then he waved his hand and Elder Jean disappeared. When he opened his eyes again, he was already in the ancient zither space. Next, Elder Jean would make restrictions for Yi Xian in the ancient zither space. Of course, the ancient zither space was obtained by Yi Xian by fusing a complete secret realm. It could be said that it was a complete world, so there was not much difference between Elder Jean inside and outside. However, the ancient zither space had a lot of ancient resources, so Elder Jean was very happy. After dealing with Elder Jean, Yi Xian walked towards the city. Of course, at this moment, Yi Xian already knew who was going to attack whom. Yi Xian already knew from Elder Jean that the person who repeatedly tried to kill him was the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang. At the same time, Yi Xian already knew that the person he killed in the Azure Dragon Gang was the adopted son of the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang. He was also the person that the leader valued the most. However, Yi Xian still pretended that nothing had happened and continued to return to the city. In fact, he had his own plans. After all, in the city lord was the most powerful existence. At this moment, Yi Xian was still the person that the city lord valued. Therefore, in the city, perhaps Yi Xian was the safest. After all, if he was outside, he would be hunted down by the Azure Dragon Gang at any time. Of course, since the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang wanted to kill Yi Xian would not mind dealing with him. The entire Origin secret realm was just a training ground for the Guardians. Therefore, Yi Xian was the main character here. No matter how strong the Azure Dragon Gang was, Yi Xian did not need to fear them. Of course, in order to completely defeat the Azure Dragon Gang, Yi Xian also needed to calculate. Chapter 2575. Auction Restrictions. There was only one auction house in this city, and it was opened by the city lord. However, although the Azure Dragon Gang did not open an auction house, they opened a treasure store. Its nature was similar to that of an auction house. It could be said that the two businesses were basically on par. The treasure store was also the main source of the Azure Dragon Gang's finances. Before this, the treasure store's biggest feature was the various special restrictions. These restrictions were not found in the outside world. They were very powerful and very practical. All this time, no one knew where the Azure Dragon Gang had obtained these restrictions. However, Yi Xian now knew that it was all because of Elder Jean. Now that Elder Jean was in Yi Xian's hands, Yi Xian would naturally use the special restrictions refined by Elder Jean to clean up the treasure store. As for letting the city lord become the boss, Yi Xian was not worried at all. After all, Yi Xian would leave this place sooner or later. In the first layer, it had nothing to do with Yi Xian who became the boss. Hello, are you looking to buy a magic treasure? An attendant came to Yi Xian's side and asked Yi Xian. Yi Xian shook his head and said to the attendant, I want to auction some items. Take me to see your appraiser. All right, this way please. If someone wanted to buy something, there would naturally be someone selling it. Therefore, the attendant did not think much of it and directly led Yi Xian to the front. Soon, the two of them arrived at a pavilion that was not very big. Guest, please come in. This is our appraisal office. Auctioning items usually require the appraiser of the auction house to evaluate the value of the item in advance. If the appraiser was not satisfied with the value of the item, the seller could choose not to sell it. Of course, at the same time, it was to prevent fake or defective treasures from appearing in the auction house and damaging the reputation of the auction house. At this moment, there were a few people in the auction house who were also appraising items. After all, the business of the auction house was not bad. Yi Xian directly went to a window. Like everyone else, he took out the restriction he had prepared and directly handed it in. You want to auction restrictions? The old man looked at Yi Xian doubtfully. This old man was considered a veteran in the auction house. However, he had never encountered a restriction in an auction before. After all, only the person who created the restriction could control it. Restrictions without an owner were relatively rare, and they were not very useful. Everyone had their own domain, so most of the time, the power of the restriction wasn't as real as the power of the domain. Of course, since Yi Xian was going to bid for it, the old man would also go and appraise it. However, when the old man saw the restriction that Yi Xian took out, he was stunned. Although auction restrictions were rare, there was a place where restrictions would appear almost every year. Moreover, by relying on these restrictions, that place had the strength to contend with the auction house. That place was naturally the Azure Dragon Gang's treasure trading company. For a long time, this treasure trading company would release a restriction at a fixed time every year. However, it was not an auction, but a display of the item. It was displayed in the morning, and the highest bidder in the afternoon would obtain it directly. It was because of these special restrictions that the Azure Dragon Gang's treasure trading company gathered a lot of popularity. Especially on the days when the restriction was about to be released, almost everyone was attracted to it. However, the buyer of these restrictions naturally had their own uses for them. Thus, it was simply impossible for them to be sold off to someone else. Of course, the auction house had spent a lot of money to buy them several times and then auctioned them themselves. Unfortunately, although this could increase the popularity of the auction house, it was a great loss. Over time they could only let it be. Who would have thought that there would be someone who wanted to auction restrictions today? It could be said that the old man was still quite puzzled and surprised. I can't appraise your restriction. Please wait a moment. I will inform our pavilion master to appraise it for you. Although the appraiser did not know the quality of the restriction master that Yi Xian was auctioning, he could tell that the restriction was not simple with just a casual glance. Therefore, he immediately called for the pavilion master. The pavilion master was the most senior and most powerful appraiser in the auction house. It was said that he had been in the appraisal pavilion for a full 100,000 years. Naturally, he had seen many more things than the others. However, when the pavilion master saw the restriction that Yi Xian took out, he couldn't help but frown. It wasn't that Yi Xian's restriction wasn't strong enough, or that there was some other problem. Rather, it was that he couldn't see through its value at all. He only had this feeling when he saw the restrictions that the Azure Dragon Gang sold. The restrictions that the Azure Dragon Gang sold were the brand of the entire treasure trading company. It was obvious that their value was not low. At this moment, the pavilion master of the appraisal pavilion was carefully fiddling with the restriction in his hand. That was because he couldn't directly determine the value of the restriction. Restrictions were not like other things. Once a restriction was activated, there was no way to take it back. Restrictions were consumables. Therefore, it could be said that no one could truly appraise restrictions. I can't give a price for this item of yours. Why don't you tell me the price you have in mind? The appraisal pavilion master asked Yi Xian. Actually, this was also the result that Yi Xian had thought of from the very beginning. In Yi Xian's heart, he was also very clear that it was very difficult to measure the price of restrictions. After all, he was only a one-time consumable. However, Yi Xian already had a plan in mind. In fact, Yi Xian's goal in auctioning restrictions this time wasn't to obtain a lot of Origin Divine crystals. Yi Xian only wanted to defeat the Azure Dragon Gang. The starting price is 100 Origin Divine crystals. Also, help me inform that I will be auctioning a restriction every month. The next time, the starting price will be 1,000 Origin Divine crystals. Yi Xian said indifferently. The reason Yi Xian dared to bid so confidently was because he already knew that restrictions refined by Elder Jean could be sold for at least 1,000 Origin Divine crystals in the treasure trading company of the Azure Dragon Gang. Some could even sell for more than 100,000 Origin Divine crystals. Yi Xian might not be able to bid too high a price for the restriction that was auctioned for the first time due to its reputation. However, Yi Xian believed that as long as the first restriction was used, it would naturally be able to sell for a high price. Chapter 2576. The beginning of fame. The owner of the appraisal pavilion glanced at Yi Xian in astonishment. Although he could not appraise the effect of the restriction, he could tell that it was not simple. But now, Yi Xian actually used 100 divine origin stones as the starting bid. He couldn't see through Yi Xian. But since Yi Xian said so, then it was settled. The next day, just as Yi Xian had expected, he didn't offer a good price for his restrictions. It didn't even cause the slightest reaction. However, it was bought by someone for 101 Origin Divine stones. Yi Xian did not care at all. However, on the fifth day, many people came to the auction house and asked if there were any restrictions on the auction. It could be said that the person in charge of the auction house did not even understand what was going on. Because the base price of Yi Xian's restriction was very low, it did not attract the attention of the auction house. However, in just a few days, hundreds of people had inquired about it. It was hard for the auction house not to notice this. As it turned out, the person who had bought Yi Xian's restriction had originally intended for a duel to the death. It could be said that he did not have much confidence in winning. This was a battle that had already been decided. At that time, many of his friends and companions had already given up hope. However, because this duel was something that the two of them had agreed on, this duel of life and death could be said to have been decided long ago. That person had already used all his strength, but he still lost, and lost miserably. However, at the very last moment, he activated the restriction that he had obtained. The moment the restriction appeared, its might shocked everyone. The battle that followed was without suspense. This person spared his opponent's life because after all, his opponent had also been prepared to let him go. Of course, what attracted everyone's attention was not the battle itself, but the mysterious restriction that changed the outcome of the battle. Only after asking around did he learn that he had obtained the restriction from an auction. Moreover, he had only spent 101 Origin Divine crystals. When the news spread, it naturally attracted the attention of countless people. In particular, those who had personally witnessed the battle rushed to the auction without any hesitation. However, Yi Xian's restrictions became famous because of a life-or-death duel. The auction house had never expected such a result. They were looking for Yi Xian, hoping that Yi Xian could auction off a few more restrictions. After all, Yi Xian had said that he would be auctioning again next month. However, they couldn't find Yi Xian at all. For a month, the person in charge of the auction house was extremely anxious and worried every day. They were worried that Yi Xian would not come again. After all, the restrictions in Yi Xian's hands were clearly no less effective than those of the Azure Dragon Gang's treasure trading company. In that case, Yi Xian didn't have to auction it at their auction house. At this moment, the pavilion master of the appraisal pavilion, who was originally in charge of receiving Yi Xian, was incomparably regretful. After all, back then, it could be said that he was neither cold nor warm to Yi Xian. If he was given another chance, then he would definitely be incomparably respectful to Yi Xian. Unfortunately, he could only wait now. Fortunately, Yi Xian still came over. It was completely different from the last time. This time, as soon as Yi Xian entered the auction house, a waiter immediately came over to welcome him. He respectfully led Yi Xian towards the auction house and didn't even need to appraise him. This was due to their jealousy and trust of Yi Xian. Of course, This was also because Yi Xian was qualified for them to treat him with such respect. A restriction master wasn't determined by one's realm. A slightly stronger restriction master was something that could only be found by chance. However, Yi Xian didn't want to interact with them. He left behind the restrictions and left. In this way, 3 restrictions were auctioned off consecutively for 3 months. Yi Xian earned more than 10,000 origin divine crystals, but more importantly, it had an impact on the auction house and the treasure trading company. It could be said that the auction house's business was unprecedentedly good during this period. There were even many people. Even if they didn't buy anything, they would still stay at the auction house and wait for the restrictions to be auctioned off. On the other hand, the treasure trading company was a bit miserable. The treasure trading company's signature was the annual restriction auction. But now, the auction house would auction off a restriction every month. Moreover, its effect was no less than that of the treasure trading company. Therefore, in a short period of time, many of the original customers of the treasure trading company had rushed to the auction house. The Azure Dragon Gang's leader was furious. He knew very well who had done all this. Not to mention that Elder Jean had been kidnapped by Yi Xian. Every time Yi Xian went to the auction house, he didn't hide his appearance at all. Therefore, it was difficult for the Azure Dragon Gang's leader to not know. However, even if he knew, what could he do? If he knew, the City Lord would know as well. The City Lord was very happy at this moment. His auction house had been suppressed by the treasure trading company, which made him very unhappy. He didn't expect that Yi Xian would come up with a new trick today and directly suppress the treasure trading company. The City Lord didn't care where Yi Xian got these restrictions, because in the City Lord's heart, Yi Xian would be subdued by him sooner or later. However, could the Azure Dragon Gang's leader really hold back? Although it seemed like he hadn't done anything, in fact, he was ready to do it himself. For 3 consecutive months, Yi Xian had accumulated tens of thousands of origin divine crystals. It was time for him to increase his cultivation level. On this day, Yi Xian took out all the resources and origin divine crystals he had accumulated and directly started devouring. In an instant, countless resources turned into experience points and flowed into Yi Xian's body. At the same time, the long-awaited system notification sounded again. Ding! System notification. Host has broken through. Current level is 3rd grade Superior Divine Emperor. Yi Xian frowned slightly. The speed of increasing his cultivation level seemed to be getting more and more difficult. That was more than 10,000 origin divine crystals. Even if the quality of these origin divine crystals was slightly lower, they were still origin divine crystals. He didn't expect that he would only break through 2 levels. However, Yi Xian wasn't disappointed at all. Yi Xian clearly knew that this was only the accumulation of 3 months. Increasing his cultivation level by 2 levels in 3 months was already considered an extremely terrifying speed. In that case, what was there for Yi Xian to be dissatisfied with? Just as Yi Xian was thinking, the old housekeeper's voice suddenly came from outside the door. "Master, there is a guest outside the door. How should we deal with him?" Yi Xian didn't think too much about this old housekeeper. After all, the old housekeeper had the strength and status. He couldn't go against the City Lord's orders at all. Therefore, Yi Xian often turned a blind eye and let the old housekeeper report his matters to the City Lord. At this moment, Yi Xian was a little confused when he heard that someone was requesting to see him. Yi Xian didn't seem to have many friends on the 1st level. The people he knew were also very limited. Then, who was it that wanted to see him? Chapter 2577. Butterfly Love Pavilion. You are? Yi Xian looked at the person outside the door and asked curiously. Are you young Master Yi Xian? Yes, I am. Young Master Yi Xian, my master invites you to the Butterfly Love Pavilion for a gathering. This is a letter from my master. My master said that it is up to you whether you want to go or not. However, my master will be waiting for you at the Butterfly Love Pavilion tomorrow. After saying that, the person walked out without hesitation. Butterfly Love Pavilion? What is this place? And who is this person who sent me a letter? Yi Xian was puzzled in his heart. It could be said that Yi Xian didn't understand what was going on with this sudden post. Yi Xian turned around and saw the old steward looking at the letter in his hand in shock. Does he know about the Butterfly Love Pavilion? Do you know about the Butterfly Love Pavilion? Yi Xian asked the old steward. Thud. Yi Xian did not expect the old steward to kneel on the ground and not dare to say a word. Yi Xian was very surprised. However, since the old steward did not want to say anything, he could not be bothered to ask further. As long as there was such a place, Yi Xian did not believe that he would not be able to find out. Yi Xian walked out of the door and prepared to deliver the restriction that was going to be auctioned this month to the auction house. Soon, Yi Xian arrived at the auction house. As he took out the restriction, Yi Xian asked casually, "Do you know about the Butterfly Love Pavilion, Pavilion Master?" Thud. The same reaction. The Pavilion Master of the appraisal pavilion at the auction house immediately knelt on the ground. He was so frightened that he did not dare to say a word. This time, Yi Xian was shocked. What was so special about the Butterfly Love Pavilion? Why did these people have such a reaction? Yi Xian furrowed his brows, but his heart was filled with anger. He refused to believe that no one could tell him where the Butterfly Love Pavilion was. Yi Xian walked to the auction house's appraisal hall and took out a seal. He then asked, "This seal will belong to whoever can answer one of my questions." As soon as he said this, not only were the people who were also preparing to auction their items, but even the appraisers were extremely tempted. "What does young master want to ask?" "As long as I know, I will definitely tell you everything." Because Yi Xian had never concealed his identity, many people knew that he was the one who had auctioned off these restrictions. Therefore, he would not have the slightest doubt about the things he took out. "All right, my question is very simple. It's just a place name. If anyone can tell me where the Butterfly Love Pavilion is, then this restriction will belong to them." Thump, thump. With the exception of Yi Xian, everyone fell to their knees in an instant. Furthermore, no one dared to make a single sound. What was going on? This time, Yi Xian's heart could not calm down. What was going on? Why were these people reacting so strongly? What kind of place was the Butterfly Love Pavilion? Why were these people so shocked just by hearing the name? However, just as Yi Xian was about to speak again, a figure appeared in the auction house. He had appeared without a sound. Yi Xian looked over and saw that it was the kid who had delivered the invitation. "I'm very sorry, young Master Yi Xian. It's my dereliction of duty. I forgot to tell you where the Butterfly Love Pavilion is. Why don't I take you there?" That person's tone was still indifferent, but Yi Xian could clearly see his fear. Clearly, his dereliction of duty was enough to cost him his life. Even if it was only because he had not told Yi Xian how to get to the Butterfly Love Pavilion immediately. Yi Xian was already very curious about the Butterfly Love Pavilion. After all, if a mere name could frighten these people to such an extent, one could only imagine that the Butterfly Love Pavilion was not a simple place. One had to know that these people did not have much of a reaction when they heard the name of the city lord. This meant that the person who lived in the Butterfly Love Pavilion was even more frightening than the city lord. "All right, you lead the way." Yi Xian nodded and followed behind that person as they walked forward. Not too long later, Yi Xian walked into a chain of teleportation portals. Yi Xian could feel that he had been teleported several times. A chain of teleportation portals was a special kind of teleportation portals. These portals followed a certain pattern and were made up of dozens of portals. If any of the portals made a mistake, they would not be able to reach their final destination. This Butterfly Love Pavilion was really well hidden. However, when Yi Xian really arrived at the destination, he was very surprised. This was because this so-called Butterfly Love Pavilion did not look special at all. There was a pavilion built in the middle of a lake. There was nothing special about this pavilion except for the colorful butterflies fluttering around it. This was the Butterfly Love Pavilion? The Butterfly Love Pavilion that was feared by countless people? Yi Xian wanted to see what was so special about this Butterfly Love Pavilion. A small boat rowed over. The young girl on the boat respectfully waited for Yi Xian to get on the boat before continuing to row forward. It could be said that Yi Xian would be able to cross such a small distance in one step. However, since the owner of this place had made such arrangements, Yi Xian could not refuse. Soon, the small boat arrived at the pavilion in the middle of the lake. From the outside, this island did not look big, and neither did the pavilion. However, when Yi Xian stepped on it, he realized that this was actually an overlapping space. The interior was actually quite large. Pairs of young girls in white robes were walking around, taking care of the flowers and colorful butterflies. This made this place seem very peaceful and easygoing. No one came to guide Yi Xian. It was as if no one would care about Yi Xian once he arrived here. However, Yi Xian still quickly walked forward. A long flight of stairs made entirely of a rare type of jade and a large hall made of countless special resources. This was the main hall of the Butterfly Love Pavilion. A faint floral fragrance filled this place. It was filled with a quiet and peaceful atmosphere. When Yi Xian walked into the hall, he discovered that there was a woman sitting in the middle of the hall. An extremely beautiful woman. "Senior brother, you are here." Senior brother? Yi Xian was very surprised. He did not seem to have a junior sister. Why did the owner of the Butterfly Love Pavilion call him senior brother? "Who are you?" Yi Xian looked up and asked the girl directly. "I am called Dai Lian. Senior brother, please take a seat. May I ask which sovereign's disciple you are?" Dai Lian had a faint smile on her face. However, the aura she unconsciously exuded was enough to shock Yi Xian. This guy's strength was absolutely incomparably daunting. However, Yi Xian did not understand the meaning behind this title of senior brother, so he did not answer. Unexpectedly, when Dai Lian saw that Yi Xian didn't reply, she wasn't the slightest bit angry. Instead, she nonchalantly said, "Since senior brother isn't willing to say, then junior sister won't ask too much. However, I wonder why senior brother came to participate in the trial and went to this world?" "Secondary realm? What's that?" Yi Xian asked in confusion. Dai Lian paused, then said, "When senior brother came to participate in the trial, did your master not tell you that the origin secret realm is divided into a primary realm and a secondary realm? Our trial is naturally a primary realm. Senior brother, you are in a secondary realm." Primary realm? Secondary realm? In an instant, Yi Xian understood Dai Lian's identity. This woman was actually also a disciple of the Guardian Trials. However, she was a true trial disciple, unlike Yi Xian, who was only half a trial disciple. No wonder people were so afraid when they heard Dai Lian Xian's name. This girl was the true master of the Origin Secret Realm. Chapter 2578. First encounter with the Guardians. Because Yi Xian had stayed in the secondary realm before, he knew better than anyone how powerful the Guardians were. There were only 12 of them, but the entire Origin Secret Realm was a training ground for them to train their disciples. Just this point alone was enough to prove how powerful they were. Of course, this also showed how powerful the Guardians' enemies, the Keepers of Order, and the mysterious ruler of chaos, were. Seeing that Yi Xian wasn't speaking, Dai Lian thought that Yi Xian was thinking about something else, so she continued, "Since senior brother is also a participant, then there's no need for you to stay in the secondary realm. It's fine to go for a walk in the secondary realm once in a while, but staying there for too long is a waste of time. After all, our training time is limited. If we don't complete the training within the time limit, then we can only be eliminated." After hearing Dai Lian's words, Yi Xian finally reacted. He nodded slightly, but didn't know what to say. However, at this time, the system notification sounded. Ding! System notification. Host has discovered the ultimate mission of the celestial realm, seal the ruler. Mission requirements. Host must become a true guardian within 1,000 years, then seal the divine ruler. If the mission fails, host will be obliterated. The sudden notification caused Yi Xian to be shocked once again. An obliteration level mission. This was an obliterated mission. Obliterating people was a mission that Yi Xian had to do his best to complete. Because a mission of this level wouldn't give Yi Xian any choice. If he failed, there was only one path, and that was death. Indifferent. What shocked Yi Xian the most wasn't the obliterated mission. It was the ultimate mission. Why was this mission called the ultimate mission of the celestial realm? Could it be that the divine ruler was the strongest person in the entire celestial realm? All of this had happened too suddenly. It was so sudden that Yi Xian couldn't react. In the past, no matter what kind of mission it was, Yi Xian would at least be prepared. But this time, Yi Xian wasn't prepared at all. The mission this time had come too suddenly and was too shocking. Yi Xian frowned, but he was already in a daze. Was it because Yi Xian's strength had increased too quickly that he had triggered this ultimate mission? Or was it because Yi Xian accidentally entered the origin mystic realm that triggered this ultimate mission? Yi Xian had no choice but to think. This was because Yi Xian had two identities when he entered the origin mystic realm. The first was the half-baked Guardian Trial Challenger title obtained from the God Emperor's inheritance. The other was the 10,000-year trial qualification that he had obtained from the Shrine of Life and the Darkness Shrine. It was obvious that although these were two trials, the difference in level was like heaven and earth turning on its head. If Xian hadn't triggered the Guardian Trial Challenger title and hadn't initiated the Origin Mystic Realm trial, perhaps Xian could have gone through thousands of years of trial in that sub-realm and broken through the 999 levels of the Origin Mystic Realm, thus triggering this ultimate mission. However, perhaps because Xian had contacted the Guardians in advance, or because Dai Lian had found Xian. Therefore, she had skipped the sub-realm trial that the Shrine of Life and the Darkness Shrine had given to Xian and entered the terrifying Origin Mystic Realm trial. Given Xian's current strength, entering the Origin Mystic Realm trial and entering the Guardian Trial Challenger was a blessing or a curse for Xian. Not to mention anything else, just this Dai Lian in front of Xian was unimaginably strong. Xian couldn't see clearly what kind of strength this Dai Lian possessed, so he couldn't tell. Because even if Xian used the system to detect it, it would only get a result. The target's realm was too high to detect. The meaning was obvious. Dai Lian's realm far surpassed Xian's, so much so that Xian couldn't detect it. Although Xian didn't know why Dai Lian called him senior brother, there were too many things that he couldn't explain, so this one didn't make much of a difference. Xian plopped down on the stone bench, but his mind was constantly thinking. There were too many unknowns that Xian had to find the answers to. Dai Lian didn't seem to see Xian's confusion at all. It turned out that Dai Lian was indeed a Guardian Trial Challenger. However, he hadn't been a Guardian Trial Challenger for long, so he hadn't been in the Origin Mystic Realm for long. And when Xian saw the Guardian, he was confused. The Guardian was also confused about Xian's identity. From Xian's body, the Guardian could feel the aura of a challenger from a long time ago. That aura allowed the Guardian to confirm that Xian was a Guardian Trial Challenger. However, he was a lost disciple. Due to the uniqueness of the Guardians, they didn't have many disciples, and every one of them was a precious talent. Therefore, the Guardians would always take care of their disciples. But even so, lost disciples would occasionally appear. The so-called lost disciples didn't know what their mission was, and didn't know how noble their identity was. The Guardians faced the Sovereign of Consciousness, that terrifying and powerful existence, the highest existence in the entire God realm. At the same time, the Guardians had to face the Guardians of Order, as well as others like the Alliance. Especially the Guardians of Order. It could be said that the Guardians of Order were constantly searching for the Guardians' disciples. The Guardians of Order weren't as strong as the Guardians, so they would do everything in their power to kill every Guardian Trial Challenger. Even if they couldn't kill them, they would cause them to deviate from their original path. Add to that the Sovereign of God's secret manipulations, and every now and then, a Guardian Trial Challenger would fall midway, or lose their way. Xian's situation just so happened to fit the criteria for a lost disciple. Xian had the ancient aura of a Trial Challenger, but the aura of a Guardian Trial Challenger wasn't something an ordinary person could possess. No matter how strong you were, even if you were the Sovereign of God, you might be able to kill a Guardian Trial Challenger, but you wouldn't be able to replicate this unique aura. This was a special existence created by the Guardians using a secret technique, and it wasn't something that others could imagine. After confirming Xian's ancient Guardian aura, the Guardian found Dai Lian. What happened next was only natural. The root of everything was that Xian had gone to meet the Guardian. Or rather, the root of everything was the Azure Dragon Gang's enmity towards Xian. Chapter 2579. Terrifying conjecture. Xian pondered these questions in his heart, but there was only one conclusion. Since he had already triggered the ultimate mission, he could only do his best to complete it. After all, this was an obliterating mission. Junior sister, may I ask, what exactly do we have to do to pass the trial? Xian lifted his head and asked Dai Lian directly. Only Dai Lian could answer his questions now. Senior brother, you don't even know this? All right, then junior sister, please tell senior brother about our trial. Dai Lian looked at Xian, smiled, and began her explanation. As Dai Lian explained, Xian finally understood what the Guardian trial was all about. The Guardian trial could be said to be relatively simple, but it was by no means simple. The Guardian trial was a process of repair against time. Every 100 years, every trial taker would face a random tribulation. This tribulation was directly released by the Source Secret Realm, and could not be controlled by any power. The tribulation would naturally be adjusted according to the target's cultivation level. No one knew what the tribulation was like. Only those who experienced it would know. The origin source secret realm was originally provided for these trial takers. It could be said that this tribulation was the same. If they encountered the most direct tribulation of divine lightning and wildfire, they would be the luckiest. For the divine lightning and wildfire tribulation, they only needed to use their cultivation level to withstand the baptism of the divine lightning and wildfire tribulation to succeed. But other than the divine lightning and wildfire tribulation, there were other trial takers, such as exploration of unknown lands, subworld trials, border missions, and so on. These trial takers were all automatically created by the source secret realm, and there was no way to control them. For example, exploration of unknown lands. The name sounded ordinary, but in reality, it was a mysterious space created by the source secret realm. Everything inside was randomly generated by the source secret realm. Originally, such a place was completely sealed off, and there was no way to interact with the outside world. But trial takers were different. The source secret realm would send these mysterious spaces to the trial takers through a mysterious force of law. Once they entered, the trial would begin. If they couldn't fight their way out, only death awaited them. There was also the subworld experience, which could be said to be an extremely dangerous mission. The title of Guardian Trial Taker was usually high and mighty. It could be said that no one dared to provoke them. Everyone in the secondary realm could only worship them. However, if a trial taker entered the secondary world to train, they would become the target of everyone in the secondary world. The origin secret realm existed for the sole purpose of training. Everyone in the subrealms was only there to serve as a foil. Thus, once a secondary realm's power was activated, not only would a portion of that disciple's cultivation be sealed, but they would also be challenged repeatedly by the source realm. The origin source mystic realm seemed to have its own thoughts. It was clearly a mystic realm, a huge place, but it could always derive a series of changes according to the needs. There were so many of these changes that it could be said that if a cultivator triggered one, what awaited them was a chain reaction. Xianxia silently listened to all of this, but he couldn't help but have a thought in his mind. Could it be that everything he had experienced was actually a result of the origin source mystic realm? Perhaps the moment Xianxia entered the origin source mystic realm, the faint trial taker aura on him had been captured by the origin source mystic realm. Then, according to Xianxia's actual situation, the origin source mystic realm had evolved? Was that why Xianxia had come to the Butterfly Love Pavilion at this moment and learned so much? Xianxia didn't know if his guess was correct. After all, Xianxia didn't even know what was so special about the origin source mystic realm. A mystic realm that had the ability to evolve its own test seemed so inconceivable no matter how he looked at it. Suddenly, Xianxia thought of a possibility. It was something he didn't dare to think about, but it was extremely possible. Could the origin source mystic realm be like Xianxia's devour space? Could it be the mental space of a super powerhouse? Why was there a difference between a secondary realm and a primary realm? Didn't Xianxia's devour space also have a distinction between an ordinary space and an ancient zither space? Why would the origin source mystic realm make changes according to the trial taker's needs? While Xianxia was in the devouring space, he could control everything according to his will. Wouldn't it be easy for him to train a person in the devouring space? Was that really the case? Xianxia didn't know, but he knew that this wasn't impossible. Xianxia had the devour space, and there were countless living beings in the devour space. Therefore, Xianxia knew that his guess wasn't completely impossible. At this moment, Xianxia actually felt his hair stand on end. If that was really the case, then how strong was that person? Furthermore, Xianxia felt like he was constantly being watched by a pair of eyes. Everything he did, and even everything he was about to face, seemed to be a script written by the owner of those eyes. As for Xianxia, regardless of whether he was willing or not, he could only follow this script. Perhaps the only thing he could do was win against this script. Of course, this was only Xianxia's own guess. After all, Xianxia didn't know what was going on. Even though Xianxia knew his identity, he still refused Dailian's invitation and didn't stay in Dailian's pavilion. Instead, he returned to the secondary realm. As far as Xianxia was concerned, he hoped that everything would have a beginning and an end. In the secondary realm, Xianxia still had some matters to settle, so he had to return. No matter if it was the people who tried to assassinate him or the city lord, Xianxia still needed to deal with them. Of course, the most important thing was that Luo and the other two girls were in the secondary realm. Even if Yi Xian wanted to go to the primary realm, he would at least bring the 3 girls along. However, Yi Xian's greatest gain from this meeting with Dai Lian was that he didn't know the difference between the primary realm and the secondary realm. He also didn't know that he was a trial taker. Most importantly, Yi Xian knew the difference in strength between the primary realm and the secondary realm. In the primary realm, there were also the Supreme Celestial Lord, Supreme Celestial King, Supreme Celestial Emperor, and Supreme Celestial Emperor. However, the difference between the primary realm and the secondary realm was that the primary realm didn't have grades. In other words, for example, the Supreme Celestial Lord was only divided into 3 grades. In other words, the power of the primary realm was absolute suppression. Even a difference of 1 grade was an insurmountable gap. The primary realm suppression was much more direct than the secondary realms. Chapter 2580. An unimaginable opportunity. The first test of a trial challenger was about mastering source strength. Only by successfully mastering at least 1 source strength of law could one be called a true trial challenger. From then on, the journey of the trial could be considered to have begun. Yi Xian had the status of a trial taker, but he didn't have the strength to back it up. There was only 1 realm above the paramount divine emperor, and it was also the only one that existed. That was the God Ruler. The God Ruler should have been a realm, but it had long since become synonymous with a person. When the God Ruler was mentioned, people only thought of the God Ruler himself, not the other realms. Among the inexplicable laws, there was a rule that stated that there could only ever be 1 God Ruler in each realm. The God Ruler controlled everything in his realm. If he wanted to, he could destroy the realm at any time. No one knew just how powerful the ruler was. Were there really only 12 protectors? Why were there so many keepers of order, but only 12 guardians? The fundamental reason was because of their battles with the God Ruler. Yi Xian had heard many rumors about the God Ruler from Dai Lian. Of course, he couldn't be 100% sure, but Yi Xian felt that it was very likely. It was said that the guardians had been an incomparably powerful force, but because they'd fought the God Ruler time and time again, they'd fallen to their current state. The core of the guardians' philosophy was to protect the God realm. They couldn't allow the God Ruler to succeed in his plan to destroy the God realm. After returning from Dai Lian Xian, Yi Xian looked at the 999 levels of the Origin Secret Realm. He didn't seem to feel the slightest fear no matter how he looked at it. This was just a trial ground for the guardians, a place for trial takers like him to train. Who cared if he was the city lord? He was nothing more than a foil. In that case, why should he be so restrained? Why should he think twice before doing anything? Staying in the Yi Manor was also to prove his talent and gain the city lord's approval. Yi Xian was Yi Xian. What did he need to prove to anyone? This time, Yi Xian did not return to the Yi residence. Instead, he walked out. Sure enough, as soon as Yi Xian walked out of the city, he immediately felt a few gazes on him. It seemed that these people who were monitoring Yi Xian were becoming bolder and bolder. They actually dared to monitor him at such a close distance? Was it really impossible for him to find out? Or did he really think that he was that easy to bully? Yi Xian smirked. Didn't you want to spy on me? Then, I'll let you have a taste of my power. With a wave of his hand, a ray of light entered the ground beneath Yi Xian's feet. In an instant, a strange force spread out with Yi Xian as the center. Didn't you want to spy on me? In that case, I'll let you suffer a little first. Yi Xian thought in his heart. At the same time, his figure moved and he immediately charged forward. Sure enough, when they saw Yi Xian suddenly accelerate, the people who were tailing Yi Xian also sped up and chased after him. However, when they arrived at that area, the ground suddenly exploded as if it was boiling. The energy that Yi Xian had just injected was not a restriction or an array. It was just a few talismans. The function of the talismans was to explode. When these people entered the area, Yi Xian did not hesitate to detonate the talismans. Perhaps it was true that detonating the talismans now would not have much of an effect. After all, the power of the talismans alone would not be able to do anything to these people. However, Yi Xian did not intend to kill them. The power of the talisman's explosion was just to buy some time for Yi Xian. The sudden attack naturally caused these people to be slightly stunned. It was inevitable that they would be delayed for a while. However, this small amount of time was enough for Yi Xian to shake off their pursuit. Originally, Yi Xian had wanted to search for Luo Luo and the others. However, when he arrived at their residence, he did not find them. Helpless, Yi Xian could only use a secret voice transmission technique to ask. However, he learned that Luo Luo and the other two women had discovered a mysterious place and were preparing to enter to explore it. Yi Xian's heart suddenly tightened. He immediately stopped the three women and rushed over. Yi Xian had already suspected that there was a power writing his script. His every action in the origin mystic realm was being watched by a pair of eyes. However, Yi Xian seemed to be even more certain of this feeling now. The three women did not go out often. Even if they did, they would not wander too far away. There were basically no origin beasts in this area. Therefore, the sudden appearance of this mysterious place was suspicious. Yi Xian didn't dare to stop in the slightest as he quickly converged with the three girls. After all, Yi Xian didn't know what that pair of eyes wanted him to do or what it wanted to do to the people around him. In just a moment, Yi Xian had already arrived at the three women's location. However, Yi Xian would never have imagined that the three women had indeed not left. However, they had already discovered the secret of that mysterious place. Treasure chests. Rows and rows of treasure chests. There were probably more than 10,000 of them. There were so many boxes. Who put them here? Why had no one discovered them after so long? Master, a few days ago, we coincidentally sensed a mysterious aura emanating from underground, so we've been paying attention to this place. A few days later, a rumbling sound came from here, and when we arrived here, this place was constantly emitting brilliant lights. That's right, young master. We followed your instructions and did not move recklessly. However, as the lights dissipated, these chests appeared. We do not know what these chests are or what they are used for. Luo Luo and Fian spoke first. Yi Xian nodded. However, his gaze was fixed on the chests. System, detect these chests. I want to see what is inside. Following Yi Xian's command, the system's notification sounded. One had to know that during the system's weakened period, detection would consume a lot of energy. However, Yi Xian had no choice but to play it safe. Ding. System notification. The target is made of special materials. You cannot see through the items inside. Cannot see through them? Yi Xian frowned slightly. Then, with a wave of his hand, the divine wood swordsman appeared. Go and see what is inside. The Godslayer was already suspended in mid-air. Yi Xian was also holding the heavenly bow in his hand. If there was something bad in those chests, Yi Xian would have no choice but to destroy them. The divine wood swordsman quickly arrived beside those chests. Then, they directly opened one of the chests. Rays of light were emitted in an instant. However, Luo Luo exclaimed, "It's actually an origin stone." Chapter 2581. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios System Recovery also rewards source stones? What were those? Luo Luo, do you know about these things? Yi Xian couldn't help but ask. Yes, young master. Although these source stones don't have the same effects as origin divine crystals, they are still many times better than spirit stones. When I was controlled by the Order Enforcers, they provided me with these source stones continuously. That's how I was able to increase my cultivation base so quickly. Was this a gift from the heavens? Yi Xian frowned. No matter how he looked at it, this situation was very strange. Divine wood sword servants, open a few more boxes to take a look. Yi Xian continued to give orders. Upon receiving Yi Xian's order, the divine wood sword servants opened 6 boxes in succession. All of them were filled to the brim with source stones. However, just as the divine wood sword servants were about to open the 7th box, a voice suddenly rang out. Don't look at them. These are all source stones and some other cultivation resources. Since you are a trial disciple of my protector and have not received any resources for such a long time, then these resources will be your compensation. Remember, the trial has already begun. Quickly increase your cultivation base. Once you reach the Supreme Divine Lord grade, you will leave the secondary realm. This voice seemed to come from all directions, yet it also seemed to only appear in Yi Xian's ears. In an instant, Yi Xian actually felt his hair stand on end. What kind of cultivation base did the person who spoke have? It was just a sentence, yet it was able to make Yi Xian feel such immense pressure. This voice appeared quickly and disappeared just as quickly, as if it had never appeared. However, at least Yi Xian now knew why these things had appeared here. They were actually for him. At this moment, Yi Xian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He never would have thought that so many origin stones would cause him to be on tenterhooks, but they were all things that were given to him. Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. With a wave of his hand, he collected half of the boxes. As for the remaining half, they were naturally left for Luo Luo and the others. Since these things are all for me, then there's no need for us to be polite. Each of you can take some as cultivation resources and strive to break through to the highest Divine Lord realm as soon as possible. The three women nodded. Although Luo Luo was already a supreme Divine Lord, this was still a gift from Yi Xian, so he would naturally accept it. System. Can these resources help you recover? Ding. System notification. You only need 1/3 of it to recover. Alright, since that's the case, you should absorb the energy and recover quickly. Yi Xian told the system. These source stones were indeed hard to come by. However, to Yi Xian, their biggest use was to make it easier for him to repair the system. After all, a large part of Yi Xian's power came from the system. If the system could not be restored, then Yi Xian would not be able to unleash his full power. At this moment, Yi Xian would naturally let the system absorb the energy from these source stones so that it could quickly recover. Following Yi Xian's command, the source stones turned into energy and were absorbed by the system. However, this process was only known to Yi Xian. Others would not be able to see the changes in Yi Xian's universe ring. Although there weren't as many guardians as there were order enforcers, there were still benefits to having fewer people. For example, the origin stones that Yi Xian had received were probably enough for over 100 order enforcers or even more to use. As Yi Xian walked back, he waited for the system notification. Only when the system was fully restored would Yi Xian's power be able to increase for a long time. Finally, the system notification came. This time, it brought Yi Xian a pleasant surprise. Ding! System notification. System energy is sufficient. Repair complete. Ding! System notification. System energy is sufficient. Upgrade conditions met. System upgrade automatically activated. Ding! System upgrade in progress. This was a blessing in disguise. Yi Xian was overjoyed. He had never expected that the system would not only be restored but also upgraded. The benefits of the system upgrade went without saying. Yi Xian was filled with anticipation. He didn't know what kind of unexpected benefits the system upgrade would bring him this time. Therefore, Yi Xian didn't even devour the source stones. This was because Yi Xian wanted to wait until the system upgrade was complete before he could see how to use the source stones. Just as Yi Xian was filled with anticipation, the system notification finally sounded. Ding! System notification. System upgrade complete. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to the host for completing the unique hidden mission. The system is broken and rebuilt. You have obtained the unique gift pack. Ding! System notification. System upgrade complete. System store updated. System mission rewards more detailed. System database updated. A series of notifications rang out continuously. It was the long-awaited system notification. During this period of time when the system was weak, only Yi Xian himself knew how difficult it was to endure. Fortunately, the system had finally recovered. That meant that Yi Xian could once again activate the berserk mode to increase his strength. The system notifications continued for a long time, but they were mostly about the details of the upgrade. As for the reward, there was only one, and that was the unique hidden mission, broken and rebuilt. The unique super reward, the unique gift pack. Just by hearing this name, Yi Xian knew that he would definitely receive a generous reward this time. System, open the unique gift pack. Ding! System notification. The host has successfully opened the unique gift pack. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 3 limitless flip gift packs. 1 realm upgrade lucky draw, 1 limitless equipment level lucky draw, 1 sword attendant gift pack. Limitless flip gift pack? Yi Xian was slightly stunned. What kind of gift pack was this? Even if Yi Xian hadn't received other gift packs before, at least he knew what they were used for based on their names. However, this limitless flip gift pack was something that Yi Xian couldn't understand. System, what is the use of this limitless flip gift pack? How do I use it? Ding! System notification. Unlimited gift packs. Every time the host opens one, as long as the host receives a reward, The host can continue to open them until there is no more gift left. Please note that the number of gift packs can be expanded without limit. However, the more the host receives, the lower the chance of winning. Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. He still didn't quite understand, but since there were 3 limitless flip gift packs, he might as well open one and take a look. System: open an infinite reversal gift pack first. As Yi Xian's name was mentioned, an exquisite gift bag appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian casually tapped the gift bag and it immediately opened. Chapter 2582. Time of drawing the reverse scale armor was an armor forged from the reverse scales of a divine dragon. Its defensive power was incomparably strong. It did not seem to be of much use. Although it was made from the mystical dragon's reverse scale, it only had defensive capabilities. It was completely useless to Yi Xian. Yi Xian casually tossed it into his Qian Kuan ring and looked at the other 2 twice-flipped gift bags. Ding! Host, please make your choice. This time, you can only choose one out of the 2 packages. Out of the 2 packages, only one has a reward. Yi Xian nodded his head, then casually opened another gift bag. Ding! Congratulations to the host. You have obtained 1 Divine Pill of Origin and 3 second flip gift packs. The Divine Origin Pill could help the host comprehend the origin energy faster. This thing was not bad. After all, Yi Xian really needed to understand the power of the origin. Although most people only started to comprehend the power of the origin of laws after they became supreme Sir Gods, it was also because of this that if Yi Xian had comprehended the power of the origin of laws at the Godly Emperor realm, the effect would definitely be much better. Moreover, the last time he comprehended the Primal Chaos Seal, Yi Xian was only a step away from grasping the origin of laws. With this Divine Origin Pill, it would naturally be very useful. So this time, it was a choice of one of the 3? Sure enough, just as Yi Xian was thinking about this, the system notification sounded. Ding! Host, please make your choice. This time, you have to choose one out of 3. Out of the 3 packages, only one package has a reward. 1 out of 3? 1/3 chance? However, the probability was still very high. Yi Xian looked at them for a long time, but the 3 gift bags were exactly the same. There was no difference at all. As such, Yi Xian could only choose based on luck. System: I choose the middle one. Ding! System notification. The host has chosen the correct gift package. The lucky draw is over. Not selected. Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. System: give me another gift pack. It could be said that flipping the gift pack was quite interesting. Of course, other than the fact that it was interesting, the most important thing was that the things he could open were really unknown. Compared to the other gift packs, which could only be used once, the flip gift pack could be used multiple times as long as one was lucky. After all, theoretically speaking, the flip gift pack could be used indefinitely. After all, he would definitely have a gift bag with a reward every time. As long as he could obtain the reward, he could continue to receive gift bags. Therefore, in theory, the flip gift pack could be obtained without limit. Moreover, from the looks of the rewards, it seemed that the rewards in the flip gift pack would not be small. Ding! Congratulations to host for obtaining Hailstone Divine Needle. Congratulations to host for obtaining 2 flip gift packs. Very quickly, the 3 gift bags were opened by Yi Xian. However, although the rewards were not bad, there was nothing suitable for Yi Xian. It wasn't that the flip gift pack was bad, but Yi Xian's luck wasn't that good this time. This was because Yi Xian didn't choose the last 2 gift bags on his second try. Therefore, he could only blame his bad luck. However, Yi Xian wasn't depressed. After all, the real highlight was just beginning. The flip gift pack was just an appetizer. Realm: a magic treasure with no upper limit. A random sword servant. These were the 3 items that Yi Xian valued the most. System: open the realm gift pack. This was a good item that could directly increase Yi Xian's realm. How could Yi Xian not be excited? Ding! System notification. Rewards are being drawn. Congratulations to host for obtaining 3 special level up elixirs. Ding! System notification. The level up elixir can directly increase the host's realm by 1. It can be used under any circumstances. Ding! System notification. The level up elixir can only increase the host's realm to the highest level, the God Emperor realm. Yi Xian was slightly taken aback, but he quickly understood the benefits of the elixir. It was specially used for breaking through realms. In order to level up from the God-Emperor realm to the Supreme God realm, one needed to have a preliminary understanding of an origin source law. However, if Yi Xian didn't have a preliminary understanding of an origin source law, then the level-up elixir could forcibly increase Yi Xian's realm and allow him to gain a random comprehension of an origin source law. By the same logic, when a Supreme God Emperor realm broke through to the Supreme God King realm, Yi Xian could also use the level-up elixir to break through the barrier. It could be said that these 3 level-up elixirs were more useful than directly increasing Yi Xian's realm by 3 levels. Yi Xian carefully put the 3 elixirs into his Qian Kuan ring. Now wasn't the time to use them. Useful things should be saved for when they were needed. System, open the random sword servant gift bag. It was indeed time for Yi Xian's sword servant to change. Ding. System notification. Congratulations to host for obtaining the Chaos Sword Servant. The Chaos Sword Servant was a special sword servant formed by the Chaos Law. This sword servant was immune to all law power attacks. At the same time, it had extremely strong physical attacks. Immune to all law powers? That was right. The Chaos Law itself was used to repair the chaotic laws. It was normal for this sword servant formed by the Chaos Law to be immune to all law power attacks. However, Yi Xian was stunned. This was because he couldn't see the Chaos Sword Servant at all. Even when he used his divine consciousness to sense it, he couldn't sense where the Chaos Sword Servant was. This Chaos Sword Servant had the unique talent of absolute concealment. In other words, it was almost impossible for him to be discovered. It was needless to say that such a sword servant would be very useful. There was still one last gift pack, and that was the Limitless Equipment gift pack. The unlimited equipment bag meant that there was no limit to the quality of the items. Even if Yi Xian got an ultimate divine weapon, it wasn't impossible. However, at this moment, Yi Xian was a little hesitant. After all, there was only one chance. It would be a lie to say that Yi Xian wasn't nervous. Yi Xian calmed himself down and looked at the bag in front of him. In the end, he chose to open it. System, open the unlimited equipment bag. Yi Xian silently waited for the result. It could be said that at this moment, Yi Xian was extremely excited and nervous. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to host for obtaining the Boundless. What was that? Yi Xian was stunned. What was the Boundless? This was a magic weapon? When Yi Xian held the Boundless in his hand, he realized that it was just a ball of light. Yi Xian admitted that this light was very mysterious. However, what was the use of this light? System, quick, explain to me what the use of this Boundless is. Ding! System notification. The Boundless is a singularity. With the Boundless, there are infinite possibilities. The host can integrate the Boundless into the devouring space. This way, the devouring space can truly become a complete world, no different from the outside world. Chapter 2583. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios blocking the way was courting death. Legend had it that when the world was first born, it was just a small singularity. As the singularity expanded, the chaotic laws inside gave birth to the 4 ultimate divine artifacts. The 4 ultimate divine artifacts continued to perfect the chaos and expand. Thus, the first God Ruler was born. The first God Ruler was extremely powerful and created countless strong people. These strong people worked hard and finally created the God Realm and countless secret realms today. Could it be that Yi Xian was holding such an existence in his hands now? Yi Xian was holding a world in his hands now. Yi Xian was extremely shocked, but he also knew that although this thing sounded very powerful, it was not very useful to him. After all, it would take hundreds of millions of years for the Realmless to grow. Fortunately, at least the Realmless could be used to perfect the devouring space. The devouring space had always been incomplete, especially the power of the laws, which was even more lacking. Now that the Realmless had appeared, it could grow into a complete world. Yi Xian waved his hand, and the Realmless entered the devouring space. And this time, the lucky draw finally came to an end. Yi Xian did not delay and walked towards the first level of the city. This time, he wanted to completely resolve all the grievances in the first level. It was time for the Azure Dragon Gang to disappear. Since they dared to assassinate Yi Xian several times, then Yi Xian could also destroy them. Because the next time he left, Yi Xian would go to the main realm and begin his true trial as a guardian. However, before Yi Xian returned to the city, he first met the Azure Dragon Gang. It turned out that the Azure Dragon Gang leader had been very uneasy when he heard that Yi Xian was going to die Lian Xian. Die Lian Xian was a taboo existence. He was worried that Yi Xian would know the people there. But after thinking about it, he felt that it was impossible. Yi Xian was only a celestial the arch after all. How could he know the people of Dai Lian Xian? However, the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang was still afraid. If Yi Xian really knew someone from Disc Love Pavilion, then he would be the one to die. Therefore, the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang brought his men to look for Yi Xian, hoping to kill him in one fell swoop. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was extremely fast. How could he possibly find him? Unable to find him, the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang had no choice but to leave behind enough men. At the same time, he issued a kill order to Yi Xian. As long as Yi Xian was found, he would be killed without question. Therefore, when Yi Xian had just reached the edge of the city, he was already blocked by people. Yes, this is that Yi Xian? There shouldn't be any mistake. Both the appearance and the realm match. Then what are we waiting for? Send out the signal and gather everyone to kill him. The gang leader has already given the order that we'd rather kill 1,000 innocent people than let Yi Xian go. All right, let's do it. As soon as the order was given, the few members of the Azure Dragon Gang, who were originally wandering around, attacked Yi Xian without distinguishing between right and wrong. Ding! Warning! Warning! The host is under attack. Boom! With a loud bang, the defenseless Yi Xian was directly sent flying. Because this attack did not threaten Yi Xian's life, the system did not activate its automatic defense. As for Yi Xian himself, he had never thought that he would be ambushed here, so naturally, he was not prepared in the slightest. That was why these people's sneak attack had succeeded. With a loud bang, Yi Xian directly crashed into a large mountain. It could be said that this attack had left Yi Xian a little dazed. Damn it, who dares to sneak an attack on me? Do you have a death wish? Yi Xian was furious. If it were anyone else, they would be furious if they were attacked for no reason. Unfortunately, these people from the Azure Dragon Gang did not take Yi Xian seriously at all. Even when they heard Yi Xian's words, they ignored Yi Xian and launched a new round of attacks. More than a dozen members of the Azure Dragon Gang rushed towards Yi Xian from all directions. Damn it, since you want to die, I'll grant you your wish. Yi Xian also lost his temper. He had been walking his own path, but these people just had to sneak an attack on him. They did not even say a word. Did they really think that Yi Xian was a pushover? Wei Zhantian, kill them for me. At Yi Xian's command, the God-Slayer immediately flew out. The two God-Slayer swords arrived in front of those people in an instant. A sword pierced through the heart. Before one of the Azure Dragon Gang members could understand what had happened, he was shocked to find that his divine spark had been shattered. These were just ordinary members of the Azure Dragon Gang, so they were not very strong. Most of them were only inferior celestial emperors. If Yi Xian wanted to kill them, it would be a piece of cake. The God-Slayer continued to move. Everywhere it went, it left a trail of blood. In the blink of an eye, all the members of the Azure Dragon Gang were killed. However, this was only the beginning of their deaths. Just as Yi Xian finished off these people, more people gathered in the distance. Among these people, there were members of the Azure Dragon Gang, as well as affiliated forces of the Azure Dragon Gang. Of course, there were also people who rushed over for the high reward of killing Yi Xian. In an instant, thousands of people appeared in the sky and on the ground. Haha, it really is Yi Xian. As long as we kill him, the Azure Dragon Gang will reward us handsomely. Don't fight with me. This Yi Xian, I want to kill him with my own hands. Charge! Kill Yi Xian and earn the reward money. The first to rush over were not the members of the Azure Dragon Gang, but these people who had gone crazy for the Origin Divine Crystal. Hundreds of people didn't care about so much as they charged towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian frowned. Hearing these people's roars, Yi Xian knew where they came from. Since you want to die, fine. I'll fulfill your wish. Suddenly, Yi Xian roared. The God-Slayer immediately burst into a ball of light. In an instant, it divided into thousands of swords and fell down like raindrops. Boom, boom, boom. Blood splattered everywhere, and broken limbs were everywhere. One move, just one move, and Yi Xian killed hundreds of people. Although these hundreds of people were not very strong, they were still hundreds of fresh lives. In an instant, there was no sound from the Azure Dragon Gang's camp. Everyone looked at the corpses, which were still bleeding in shock. They felt their scalps go numb. Kill! Damn it, kill that guy! Suddenly, someone shouted. Immediately, more people rushed toward Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at those people silently and raised his hand indifferently. I'm not a murderous person, but since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Chapter 2584. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The terrifying mantra of the 6 paths. Following Yi Xian's words, many of the people who had been charging at Yi Xian suddenly fell to the ground. When the people next to him checked, they realized that his divine spark had already shattered. Die! 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 Every time Yi Xian pointed in a direction, a large number of people would die. Most importantly, no one knew what kind of attack had caused these people to fall. The people who had been charging forward excitedly a moment ago all stopped in their tracks. They were scared. They were scared from the bottom of their hearts. They didn't know what had happened. Yi Xian hadn't done anything. All he had done was raise his hand, and so many people had died. A sense of panic and helplessness spread in the hearts of the people. What kind of existence were they facing? Why? Why didn't he need to do anything? He only needed to point his finger, and the people there would die. Retreat! When the first person retreated, even more people retreated in panic. This time, hundreds of people had charged forward, but more than half of them had remained in the path of the charge. Most importantly, no one knew how they had died. Apart from the fact that their divine spark had shattered, no one could see anything strange. What kind of power could be so terrifying? What kind of mystique could be so strange? Yi Xian stopped what he was doing. Using the mantra of the 6 paths so many times had taken a toll on Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian felt that it was worth it. These people had obviously been bewitched by the Azure Dragon Gang. Yi Xian really didn't want to kill them, but if he didn't make them feel fear, they wouldn't know what fear was. Only by making them feel fear would they stop. Even if he had to kill, Yi Xian hoped that the people he killed were all from the Azure Dragon Gang. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to the host. You have completed the mantra of the 6 paths. Ding! System notification. The mantra of the 6 paths has been successfully upgraded. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the 6 paths of truth. The 6 paths of truth contain the death character formula, injury character formula, extermination character formula, Tao character formula, destruction character formula, and seal character formula. The 3 words death, injury, and destroy had the same effect as before. The only thing that had changed was the 3 words destroy and seal. But at this moment, Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to check the effects of these 3 words because Yi Xian wanted to prove it with actual combat. At this moment, seeing that these wandering people had been defeated by Yi Xian twice, the Azure Dragon Gang finally made their move. At this moment, one of the Azure Dragon Gang's elders was leading over 100 Azure Dragon Gang members to attack Yi Xian. Saber light and sword shadows filled the air. In an instant, the sky was filled with countless attacks. These attacks were incomparably fast. At the same time, they were also extremely ferocious. It was as if he wanted to completely suppress Yi Xian in one move. Yi Xian looked up at the countless attacks in front of him and said indifferently, "Mantra of the 6 paths, destroy." When he said this, Yi Xian actually spat out a mouthful of blood. It turned out that the pressure of using the 6 paths of truth was too great. Even if Yi Xian could use it, he would have to pay a huge price. At this moment, this mouthful of blood was the best proof. However, how powerful was the destruction character formula? Following Yi Xian's voice, the mysterious power had already been activated. At the beginning, it seemed like nothing had happened. The attacks continued to rush towards Yi Xian, and the Azure Dragon Gang members didn't seem to be affected in the slightest. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Disappeared. Everything had disappeared. It was silent, as if this was how it was supposed to be. The countless attacks all disappeared. As for the people from the Azure Dragon Gang, they also disappeared. However, there were some attentive people who discovered that the color of that area had changed. It was a faint red. Blood red. That area had been completely destroyed by Yi Xian's words. Everything had been decomposed into its most primitive state. Boom! Suddenly, an incomparably loud explosion rang out. Along with this loud sound, a wave of air suddenly exploded. It turned out that it wasn't that there was no sound, but that the attack had been too powerful. Therefore, the sound of the attack had been suppressed and had only burst out at this moment. The powerful wave of air made many people feel as if they couldn't stand properly. However, the most important thing was the smell of blood in the air. There were hundreds of people. Those hundreds of Azure Dragon Gang members had all been turned into a bloody mist. What kind of power was this? Why was it so strange and powerful? Some of the more timid people were so frightened that they fell to the ground, their faces extremely pale. At this moment, even Yi Xian was rather shocked. He hadn't expected that the upgraded mantra of the 6 paths would be so powerful. It had only been a word, but it had actually cleared out all the enemies within a certain range. If there was anyone who could survive this attack, then it could only be that elder. However, at this moment, the elder of the Azure Dragon Gang was also extremely frightened. Just now, he had instinctively sensed that there was an extremely terrifying and dangerous aura ahead, so he had stopped moving forward. However, he now realized that his stop had actually saved his life. Furthermore, even though he hadn't been at the core of the attack, he was still in an extremely miserable state. At this moment, blood was continuously flowing out of the elder's body. Just now, an extremely terrifying attractive force had suddenly appeared. Even though he had been extremely careful, he still hadn't been able to avoid the aftershock of the attack. That attractive force had seemed as if it was going to suck him into an unknown abyss. If not for the fact that this elder was at the very least a lower Supreme Divine Lord Realm cultivation base, he would likely have long fallen by now. At this moment, the elder stood silently in his original spot. Only after coming into such close contact with death would one know how much one feared death. Yi Xian looked indifferently at the people in front of him. He was waiting for the arrival of the Azure Dragon Gang leader. This was because Yi Xian believed that since the Azure Dragon Gang leader was determined to kill him, he would definitely not send these small fries to their deaths. Although Yi Xian hadn't broken through to the Supreme Divine Lord level yet, he was no longer a mere godly venerate like when he had first entered the Origin Source secret realm. Yi Xian was waiting for the main character to appear. Of course, if these people didn't know what was good for them, Yi Xian wouldn't mind killing them. There was no sound. Only a gentle breeze could be heard. Chapter 2585. Chapter 2585. Chapter 2585. The Chaos Sword unleashed its power. Some people still wanted to charge at Yi Xian, but Yi Xian merely glanced in that direction and they broke out in cold sweat. Up until now, Yi Xian had not made a move at all. He had only waved his hand and hundreds of people had fallen. Who would dare to provoke such a powerful force? Yi Xian was waiting. Silently waiting. As for those thousands of people, they only dared to wait with Yi Xian. Finally, the people Yi Xian was waiting for arrived. However, what made Yi Xian frown was that this time, it was not just the Azure Dragon Gang leader who had come, but the city lord as well. It seemed that all the powerful fighters on the first level had gathered here. Yi Xian frowned. If he really faced so many powerful fighters, Yi Xian had no chance of winning. However, Yi Xian could not retreat now. He wanted to see what these people were up to. At this moment, the Azure Dragon Gang leader was the first to step forward. He frowned as he looked at the severed limbs all over the ground. Did you kill them? The Azure Dragon Gang leader raised his head and looked at Yi Xian. His voice was filled with anger. However, anyone could see that his anger was just an act. All of this had been arranged by him. Moreover, the people who had died were just ordinary gang members. The Azure Dragon Gang leader had no reason to be so angry. Unless, of course, his anger was to find an excuse for himself. In fact, the Azure Dragon Gang's leader, the city lord, and the others had a gathering when Yi Xian went to play with the Butterfly Love Pavilion. At that gathering, there was only one topic to discuss, and that was Yi Xian. According to their thinking, if Yi Xian was really related to the Butterfly Love Pavilion, then this matter would be a little tricky. Therefore, it was not only the Azure Dragon Gang leader who wanted to kill Yi Xian, but also the city lord. The Butterfly Love Pavilion was a place that they did not dare to provoke. However, at the same time, the Butterfly Love Pavilion had never interfered with their affairs. Therefore, it was like a tacit agreement. There was almost no interaction between the two parties. At this moment, They speculated that Yi Xian's appearance was because Yi Xian wanted to use the Butterfly Love Pavilion's influence to harm the first level, snatching their benefits. Therefore, when the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang proposed to kill Yi Xian, all of them immediately agreed. Even those who did not agree chose to acquiesce. Because in their hearts, as long as Yi Xian did not die, he would definitely become a great disaster. At this moment, the leader of the Emptiness Gang took the initiative to speak. Naturally, the others did not speak up. Yi Xian looked at the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang and said indifferently, "So what? Didn't you want my life? I'm right here. Just come and get it." The leader of the Azure Dragon Gang frowned. He couldn't figure out what exactly Yi Xian wanted to do. After all, Yi Xian's current behavior was indeed a little strange. "Brat, do you want to die? All right, I'll fulfill your wish. What are you all standing around for? Charge together and kill him." The leader of the Azure Dragon Gang roared. He did not make a move himself, but he ordered the ordinary gang members around him to do so. This was because the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang was worried that Yi Xian might have made some preparations. In his opinion, even though Yi Xian was already a superior celestial emperor, he still did not have the qualifications to challenge him. Therefore, he naturally felt that Yi Xian might have some kind of helper. At this moment, he ordered the ordinary gang members to all charge together. His goal was to investigate Yi Xian's background and find out whether Yi Xian really had any kind of backup. However, what surprised the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang was that no one carried out his orders. In the past, these gang members would immediately move when they heard his orders. However, today, not a single one of them moved. The leader of the Azure Dragon Gang was very surprised. One had to know that the Azure Dragon Gang had always been a tyrant. They had never seen anyone afraid of trouble. Perhaps this Yi Xian was indeed a little strange, but he should not have made his people fear him. Therefore, the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang narrowed his eyes at his subordinates and said angrily, "Didn't you hear what I said?" Many of the Azure Dragon Gang members' legs were trembling. Of course, they knew their leader's methods. If they disobeyed his orders, they would end up in a terrible state. However, after witnessing Yi Xian's strangeness with their own eyes, how could they dare to act rashly? At this moment, these gang members were caught in a dilemma. On one hand, there was the incomparably strange Yi Xian, and on the other hand, there was their leader. It was indeed difficult for them to choose. "Do you want to die?" The leader of the Azure Dragon Gang roared suddenly. This was the first time someone had disobeyed his orders. Moreover, it was not just one or two people, but almost everyone present. Hearing the leader's anger, an elder standing behind the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang immediately shouted, "Follow me and kill. Kill Yi Xian. The leader will reward you handsomely." In groups of 2s and 3s, there were indeed a few gang members who followed him. Although they were very full, they still followed him. However, there were more people who did not move at all. The leader of the Azure Dragon Gang furrowed his brows. He did not know why his gang members dared to disobey his orders. However, he soon understood. Yi Xian's current target was the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang, the City Lord, and the others. Why would Yi Xian care about these gang members? With a wave of his hand, the Chaos Swordsman had already rushed out. The Chaos Swordsman had the ability to be absolutely invisible. It was not something that the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang and the others could see through. Therefore, at this moment, what they saw was an extremely strange scene. They saw that the heads of those who rushed toward Yi Xian were all chopped off. Most importantly, the protective divine light on their bodies did not ripple at all. In front of them were all kinds of offensive divine powers. However, it was this incomparably strange scene that caused everyone's heads to disappear without a trace. No one knew what had happened, but once again, the gang leaders felt what it meant to be afraid. At this moment, a gang member cautiously walked up to the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang and softly told him what had happened to them. This time, the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang was not only frowning, but his face was full of dark clouds. Could it be that the Love Butterfly Pavilion had already made a move to help the gang leader? The leader of the Azure Dragon Gang was not the only one who thought so. Everyone was thinking so. After all, this was too strange. As long as someone rushed toward Yi Xian, they would either die immediately or turn into a bloody mist. This time, even their heads disappeared without a trace. This made it difficult for them to understand what had happened. For a moment, none of the powerhouses, including the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang, dare to make a move because they were also afraid. The Love Butterfly Pavilion gave them too much pressure. So much so that they did not dare to act rashly. Chapter 2586. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation in Absolute Victory. The mayor, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke. His words were acknowledged by the crowd. Indeed, if he was really from the Butterfly Love Pavilion, he would not have hidden himself like this. Humph, let me go and meet this kid. I want to see what he has up his sleeve. Suddenly, an old man stepped out from behind the mayor. He was an elite of the lower supreme divine state. It could be said that he had the power to kill Yi Xian. As he spoke, he charged towards Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian did not move at all. He just watched quietly. This was because Yi Xian knew that as long as the Chaos Swordsman was not exposed, none of them would be a match for the Chaos Swordsman. The Chaos Swordsman's ability to hide and its special ability to be immune to all laws gave it an unimaginable strength. Unless one could detect it and put up a defense, no one would be able to survive the sneak attack of the Chaos Swordsman. After all, most people relied on the protection of the laws. However, the Chaos Swordsman was immune to all laws. Wouldn't that mean that these people were defenseless against the Chaos Swordsman? Trying to defend against the Chaos Swordsman's attack with just their physical body? It was almost impossible because the Chaos Swordsman had another special characteristic, which was its powerful physical attack. The terrifying Chaos Swordsman could be said to be invincible as long as he was not detected. Such a powerful existence could only be created by the system. After all, everyone cultivated the power of the laws. How could anyone be immune to the power of the laws? Purely cultivating the power of physical attacks. The old man charged towards Yi Xian. Unfortunately, he didn't take more than a few steps before collapsing. This time, he was so close that his blood almost splattered on the Green Dragon Gang leader and the others. The strange aura had also spread to these elites. At this moment, these elites finally understood why the Green Dragon Gang members did not dare to step forward. It was too scary, too strange. Perhaps death was not too likely. At the very least, there were many people here who were not afraid of death. However, the key was that they did not even know how they died, and they were already dead. This was somewhat terrifying. At that moment, weren't those people exactly like that? Even when they died, they didn't understand why they died. As for those who were still alive, how could they not be afraid? Damn it! Who are you? Come out! The city lord let out a furious roar as an incomparably powerful force immediately erupted from his body. This power turned into a ray of light and quickly spread out in all directions. This light was a divine ability that the city lord was quite proud of. This was because not only did the light possess powerful offensive capabilities, but it could also be combined with divine sense. Wherever the light passed, no life aura could escape the city lord's senses. However, this time around, the city lord had failed. It was not that the light did not cover the Chaos Swordsman. It was because the Chaos Swordsmen were not affected by the light at all. When the light swept across the Chaos Swordsman, the mayor could only feel that it was as lifeless as a piece of rock. Pest! Beside the leader of the Azure Dragon Gang, an elder who was standing side by side with him suddenly had his head chopped off and sent flying. One had to know that the elder was still watching Yi Xian a moment ago and was completely unprepared. Who would have thought that in the next moment, he would be killed? This time, the Azure Dragon Gang leader was scared out of his wits. After all, at such a close distance, one of his elders died just like that. However, he did not notice it at all. It was impossible to say that he was not afraid. Suddenly, Yi Xian, who had not moved at all until now, moved. Step by step, he walked towards the Azure Dragon Gang leader and the others. Yi Xian knew that if he went over now, no one would dare to do anything to him. Of course, if there was anyone, the Chaos Swordsmen would immediately kill them. It could be said that as long as the Chaos Swordsmen were not discovered, the lives of these people were all in the hands of Yi Xian. As long as Yi Xian willed it, no matter if it was the Azure Dragon Gang leader or the city lord, they would all die without a doubt. Yi Xian walked forward step by step, but it was as if he was stepping on the hearts of these people. It could be said that these people were extremely nervous. This was because Yi Xian's methods were too strange. This was because Yi Xian's strength was unquestionable. No one dared to use their cultivation realm to measure Yi Xian's strength. This was because Yi Xian's strength could not be measured by cultivation realm. One had to know that they did not even see Yi Xian make a move, but so many people had already died. Among them, there was no lack of powerful elders. Therefore, everyone knew that Yi Xian had a mysterious power protecting him. In other words, Yi Xian had a mysterious method that could kill any one of them. What do you want? The Azure Dragon gang leader was extremely nervous. His whole body was shining with all kinds of defensive lights, but he did not know that the Chaos Swordsmen were right beside him, even within his defensive lights. Killing him was just a thought from Yi Xian. You tell me, what do I want? Yi Xian looked at the Azure Dragon gang leader and asked calmly. This is not the first time you have attacked me, right? Back then, you were the one who sent Elder Jean to assassinate me, right? And today, you have gathered so many experts and your subordinates. If you are not here to kill me, are you here to welcome me? Yi Xian looked at the Azure Dragon gang leader indifferently. Today, this guy must die. Kid, I admit that your methods are impressive, but don't forget that we have so many experts here. Do you want to fight against so many of us by yourself? The Azure Dragon gang leader mustered up his courage and said to Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian smiled and said, Experts? Why don't I see any experts? Following Yi Xian's words, the Azure Dragon gang leader felt as if a gust of wind blew past him. However, after a while, there was a burst of sound beside him. When he turned around to look, he discovered that all the elders belonging to the Azure Dragon gang had actually died at this moment. Yi Xian waved his hand and the countless interspatial rings flew towards him. After a while, Yi Xian took them. When he did all this, Yi Xian was so casual. He did not even have the slightest precaution. The experts you are talking about, are you referring to those corpses? After taking the interspatial rings, Yi Xian turned around and said to the Azure Dragon gang leader. The Azure Dragon gang leader felt as if his whole body was cold. It was because he was frightened by Yi Xian. Because at this moment, the Azure Dragon gang leader realized that it would be easy for Yi Xian to kill him.